Working on cruise ships, you hear all kinds of wild stories. Old sea legends, drunken crew tales, and occasionally, stories about other stuff. Dark stuff. Most of it's just harmless chatter passed around the mess halls and smoke decks. But every now and then something sticks. About 4 years ago I was working a South American season, Rio, Buenos Aires, Valparaiso. I spent most of my off hours hanging out with the Brazilian crew. Good people, loud, funny, and always up for a laugh. The gift shop manager was especially outspoken. He'd always be complaining mostly about how lazy his team was, how they fake being sick or skip shifts for the dumbest reasons. But his favorite rant? That his staff kept saying they saw a little girl running around the gift shop, always late at night, and always when no passengers were around. He'd laugh it off, say they were just trying to get out of work. "They're scared of a damn ghost child now?" he said once, rolling his eyes. "Ridículo." One night a group of us, him, me, and the head of photography, were sitting in the back of the staff cafe drinking a cheap machine coffee. It was just after midnight. The ship was gently rocking as we cut through the dark water. The gift shop manager was especially wound up, fuming about how he was going to have to cover for 2 of his team again. "Lazy cowards," he kept saying, "making up ghost stories like children." A few hours later, my cabin rings. It's the photo manager, and she sounds rattled. "Can I come to your room?" she asks. "Now?" "He's here, and something happened." I thought maybe someone had gotten bad news from home, perhaps a death in the family. So I rushed over, but when I stepped into her cabin I found him there, the same bolsterous, tough-as-nail guy huddled on the edge of her bed, shoulders shaking, his face pale as a sheet. He was crying. After a few minutes, he told me what happened. He'd been working alone in the small back office tucked just behind the clothing section of the gift shop. His room itself faced a long mirror that ran almost the full length of the outer wall. He said it started with a soft giggling sound. At first, he thought maybe someone's kid had gotten into the shop, but it was past midnight, and the entire deck was closed and sealed off. The only people who would be around were crew sneaking food or guests gambling in a casino. He looked up, and that's when he saw her in the mirror. A tiny shadow barely the height of the counter peeking around the edge of the open office door, only visible in the reflection, like she was leaning around to watch him, half curious, half playing a game. He turned around, but there was nothing. But in the mirror she was still there. He said his blood turned to ice, and every hair on his body stood on end. At first he couldn't move, he just locked eyes with her in the glass. Then she laughed and vanished out of sight. He bolted and ran full speed out of the shop, all the way to the crew's stairwell, and didn't stop until he found the photo manager and begged her to let him stay in her room. He swore he'd seen something that didn't belong on this ship anymore. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't the type of person to make things up, and I'd never seen him like that, cracked open, terrified and broken. The next day, I brought it up to my boss, half joking and half expecting her to roll her eyes. But to my surprise, she didn't laugh. She just looked at me, her face suddenly serious, and said, "You don't know the story." Apparently, 2 decades ago, a little girl had been on board with her parents. They'd just finished a family show in the theater and were heading back to their room. The girl was running ahead, excited and laughing like kids do, when she slipped away near the gift shop too fast for her parents to catch. She ran through the shop, into the casino and then towards the atrium. The atrium is a massive open space within the center of the ship, lined with glass elevators, and it stretches from deck 12 all the way to deck 5, a long, vertical drop surrounded by shiny chrome rails and hanging lights. The little girl leaned over the railing, a bit too far, and fell. They say her neck snapped instantly when she hit the marble floor below, and apparently she never left. Crew over the years have said the same thing. They hear giggles, see shadows, items are moved. that they catch fleeting glimpses of a little girl just out of sight. Some even claimed they'd seen the elevators move on their own in the middle of the night, always stopping at deck 7, right where she took her last steps while being alive. I still don't know what to make of it. I'm not a superstitious person, and I've worked dozens of ships and heard many ghost stories. But after seeing him that night, I believed him. And I believe she's still there. It was the mid-90s. I was in my early 20s and was on a date with this guy that I had had a crush on for a long time. We went out for dinner that ended up at a bar until closing time. We stumbled out of the bar pretty drunk and decided to take a walk along the beach, aka awkwardly trying to find a way to move the date along to more physical things. We found a deserted-looking spot and sat down on a log and started making out in a totally obnoxious kind of way. I noticed someone walking behind where we were sitting, but didn't turn to look around, thinking it was someone walking their dog. This area of beach was close to downtown and a really big park, and was usually very active at night, though less so on this night since it was a bit chilly and windy. The person who walked behind us circled around onto the sand, walking close to the water. Again, I wasn't concerned or alarmed. I assumed it was someone else, just enjoying the night. Then I could see that they were standing stock still and staring at us. I couldn't totally make out the person's features, but I could see that they looked angry. I realized he probably thought we were a gay couple, but I could see that they looked angry and disapproving. It was at that moment I realized he probably thought we were a gay couple. My date was obviously male, but I had super short hair and was wearing faded jeans and combat boots. Don't judge it, it was the 90s. So, probably to the guy, I looked male too. And what's more, at this time, a lot of gay males were dressing in kind of a skinhead look, with shaved heads, faded jeans and combat boots. The area that we were in, the west end of Vancouver, had a lot of gay bars, and the park that we were beside was a well-known cruising spot for gay men. I kind of smirked to myself when I realized what the guy was thinking. I kept making out with my date, enjoying the fact that a homophobic person was cringing a few feet from me. That's when I realized that he was holding a big chunk of concrete in his hand. He quickly walked over to us with intent, I'm guessing smashing our heads in. I pulled away from my date and started hurriedly to talk to him, with my face towards the man so that he could easily see I was female. I saw the shock on his face when he realized, and he quickly put his hand behind his back and walked off. I didn't tell my date what almost happened. I just told him that I was cold and wanted to go. I was shaken. If I didn't see the guy and hadn't noticed what he was holding, he might have just smashed one of us over the head with a piece of concrete. There were a lot of gay bashing incidents in that area over the years, but usually it was groups of drunken guys, not a loner like this. I genuinely feel that he was actively looking for someone to hurt that night. Many years ago, I used to work the night shift at a hotel in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. During the season it wasn't so bad, mostly families and stuff. We had on-site security too. However, in the off-season, the winter months were different. The cheap weekly rates we'd offer attracted a lot of creepy people. The idea was supposed to be making money in the off-season by renting to what is known as snowbirds, older retired people who came to the beach for a month, through winter. It did not always work out that way though. The cheap rates made it possible for a less than desirable element to become a long-term resident. I've discovered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical assaults, and more during the winter months. Working third shift, I would meet some interesting people. The cold weather would mean some homeless people would come in and get warm and grab a free cup of coffee. I wasn't supposed to let them in, but it's not in me to be cruel. I would let them grab a coffee and get warm for a minute, as long as they didn't cause trouble. As you can see, the night shift in the winter made for some crazy and sometimes creepy stories. I have a lot of them, but this one stands out because it didn't end up well for me. In fact, I had agreed to come in an hour earlier the next night for the young lady that worked second shift in exchange for her working an hour late for me on this night, so that I could enjoy the wrestling show. Ironically enough, I met Terry Funk that night, a wrestling legend known for his hardcore and bloody matches. Little did I know, I was about to experience this kind of violence for real. I was supposed to be there at midnight due to her working over an hour for me. I normally come in at 11 p.m. I counted the register, and she briefed me on her shift as to what had happened as per usual. As she was leaving, my friend Andrew pulled up. He worked second shift maintenance at the hotel, and the other 2 hotels our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work, grab us some food, and we would play World of Warcraft on our laptops after eating for a while since business was so slow. He was just getting my money and ordering food and getting ready to leave. I was excited telling him about how much fun I had at the wrestling show and was showing him my Terry Funk t-shirt that I was so proud of. I was just walking back to the office to put the shirt up when I heard the doorbell, indicating a customer had entered. It is true what they say. Not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. I had turned around when I heard someone say something loudly, but I still couldn't make out what they had said. I had just reached the doorway when I saw Andrew fall down in front of me. The next thing I know, a guy walks around the corner and punches me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me and I went down to one knee. The next thing I know, he hits me in the head with the pipe. The next thing I know, I hear the other guy who I hadn't noticed in this moment saying that I got away to get a cop. They left out the door. I was finally able to get to my feet. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurting and scared and really freaking out. I realized that they could come back, so I ran and locked the door. I didn't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I called 911. Blood had started pouring down my head, and I told the operator I had been attacked and needed an officer and an ambulance. They called the other hotel we ran and let the night manager called Travis, who was all over 3 properties, know what happened. He thought I was messing with him at first, because when we got bored we would prank each other. I finally convinced him I wasn't joking. He was going to lock up and come down. The cops and ambulance pulled up, and I opened the door. It was at this time that I found out, after they sucker punched and punched him and then knocked him down, Andrew was able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape just as a cop was driving by, which he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the ER where I had to have 10 staples in my scalp, and they gave me morphine for pain. I had no way to get home after being treated, but the doctor and nurses took pity on me and paid for a cab. My plan was to go back to work, because this was December and Christmas was coming. I had 3 kids and needed all the hours I could get. When I got back to the hotel, the IT guy Ted was there with his wife Barbara, who also worked at the front desk. She was shocked to see me. She thought I would still be in the hospital. I thought I had only been hit in the head after being punched. The video which Ted was pulling from the police showed a different story. After I went to one knee, the guy had hit me not just 1, but 10 times. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up for some reason. I don't remember that. I guess I was out on my feet. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe till his friend tells him that Andrew got away and got the cops. The 2 of them then ran out. I was given a room at the other hotel, and Ted and Barbara gave me a lift there as I was in no condition to drive due to morphine. They also gave me a paid week off to heal up.
They switched me over to the other hotel on night shift for a month just in case they were after me in particular. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed armed robbery due to Andrew getting away and me just not going down. It shook me up though, not knowing. Even though I was at the other hotel when I came back to work the night shift, I was still nervous. Every time the door chimed, I tensed up. I couldn't afford to quit though. As I said, I had 3 kids I was supporting. They never caught the guys as far as I know. A detective stopped about 2 months later when I was working second, and he showed me several mugshots and asked me if any of them looked familiar. I never got a great look at them, as it all happened so fast. I had seen the video, which wasn't the best quality. Even so, 2 of them looked very familiar. I pointed them out, and he asked me how sure I was. I told him honestly, like 85%. He then yells and asks me if I wanted someone to go to jail for an attempted murder on 85%. And I was stunned into silence. I was the victim. I was attacked for no reason and he was yelling at me. It's my fault I was too busy being attacked to get a good look at them. I no longer work at the hotel on night shift, and I'm glad, because it turns out it's just too dangerous in that area. My mum and stepdad got married when I was 4. My mum and I moved into the house my stepdad owned after they got married. It was just the 3 of us and our animals. I am an only child, and at the time of this story we had 2 big dogs who lived inside and out. The dogs usually roamed outside at night on the 20 acres we owned. We lived in that house for 14 years, and I saw my fair share of creepy stuff. But this story sticks out the most. I was around 7. I know I was old enough to use the bathroom at night alone, but still young enough that my mum usually checked on me to make sure I got back to bed okay. I also know for sure that it was Christmas Eve. Our tree was always off at night, except for Christmas Eve. So the house itself. Our house was small, 850 square feet, but I loved it. When you walked in the front door, you were immediately in the living room. Straight ahead was the hall. In reality, it was a small rectangle that had doors on 3 of the 4 sides. From the living room/front room, you could see into the bathroom. Heading to the bathroom, you have a closet on the left, bathroom door, my bedroom door on the right, an empty wall the width of a door, and my parents' bedroom door. The kitchen was off the left of the living room and shared a wall with the bathroom/closet. Super cute, just cozy. We also had an unfinished basement with the stairs in the living room by the kitchen/door to the back porch. So on to the story. I got up to use the bathroom on Christmas Eve. I got up from bed, went out to my bedroom door, and turned the corner into the bathroom. I, of course, had to peek at the tree and the presents underneath. I thought I saw a monster truck. At the time, I was really into them and wanted a remote control one, but didn't stop to look because I really had to go. After I finished up my business, I got up and looked towards the living room. I really wanted to peek at my presents before I went back to sleep. We didn't close the door in my house growing up unless we had people over, so I could see the front door and the glow from the tree from my seat. I looked back at the toilet to flush, and when I looked back up at the doorway hall between the dining room and the living room, I saw the silhouette of a boy. He looked about my age from his height, but he had his back to me, so I'm not sure what his face looked like. He was standing in the doorway using his left hand to hold the door frame so that he could lean into the living room on his tiptoes and peek at the presents. In his right hand he had a red sucker. His whole body was dark because of the lack of light, and the Christmas lights shone behind him. I shuffled to the edge of the bathroom, so I was just inside the doorway. If I had put my arm straight out, I would have touched this kid. I'm standing there about to ask him what he's doing, when he slowly drops back to his flat feet and starts to turn to face me. As he starts to turn, I get the most intense feeling of dread, fear, and anxiety. I can see the profile on his face and he's just smiling, staring straight ahead. Just as he's about to get all the way round, my mum walked out of her room and asked if I was okay. In the split second it took for me to look at her and back at the boy, he was gone. I instantly felt better, and it was as if he'd never existed. I pointed to the living room, and my mum assumed I was trying to peek at presents, so she just tucked me back into bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly and woke up and totally forgot about it the next morning, and I did get my remote control monster truck that year. It was years before it came back to me, and I told my mum about it. She wasn't even surprised, because like I said, a lot of weird stuff happened in that house.
This happened when I was 18. I was a male dressed in black pants, a white undershirt, and a black long-sleeve shirt with black shoes. My passenger was a 20-year-old female, dressed in a light-colored shirt with jeans. It was late in the 20th century and life was good. I was driving an original paint job, an interior 1970s Camaro SS, tipped with the scales for driving fun. I was a happy guy. Anne had a request for me to bring my passenger to Las Vegas to meet her family. She was a friend of a friend, so I didn't worry about her, and my car was seeming in good shape for the trip. It was July and very hot in Southern California. The day we took off for Las Vegas, cueing the stereo, we headed out. All was going well in our drive. As the temperature soared from very hot to hot, we made our way along Interstate 15 North. If you've ever driven this road, you know it's extreme, but at that time there was not much along the road. As we progressed to the very long incline where a truck lane to the right exists, the shimmer of mirage came off the road. I didn't overexert the car, but soon noted a warning light on my dash cluster. I smelled something sweet and burnt, transmission fluid. Not really flammable, but I needed to keep moving. I let my passenger know what was going on and said that I needed to find a place to pull over. On this incline, that was a non-option, so I set the emergency flashes and slowed down to a pace of about 40 miles an hour. As we came to the top of an incline, an exit to the right, named Summit something or other, was there. We exited and headed to what appeared to be a small truck stop, and it featured a prominent tall sign exclaiming EAT. The thing is, it was nearly deserted. Only one old man sat on a bench out front, and otherwise the place was looking long closed and dry. I told my passenger to stay in the car while I inspected it. She lit a cigarette and stepped out. It did not take long to find that the pan gasket for the transmission was leaking badly. I popped the front hood and measured the dipstick. No liquid showing, not good. What I did not have with me was fluid and a gasket. I spoke to the man and asked about the part shop. I had tools with me in the trunk. He was long on slow talking, but seemed decent enough, just hanging out in front of a closed and deserted diner/gas station. He said the nearest place for parts was Las Vegas. I was in distress, and this was before cell phones were common to everyone. Corona didn't even have the row of dealerships along the highway then, and I went to speak with my passenger. There was no working payphone and no means to get any help. The old man was the odd thing here, as he got there somehow but had no car. In a few minutes, a Dodge Ram pick-em-up truck appeared. The man drove up and parked. He got out of his truck and stood about 5'10", and was maybe 60 with a head of white hair and a white cowboy hat and an amiable gut. A mature white guy who carried himself like any redneck would. In short, in my life perspective of that time, I saw no threat there. The man walked over to the old man, and they spoke for a bit. The old man gestured to us in a friendly way, and the man seemed jovial and walked over. He introduced himself as Mike, but that everyone called him Hoss. I introduced myself and my passenger, and he did nothing to seem creepy at all. We might as well have been at a social gathering with mixed ages. Hoss said his friend mentioned we needed to get to Las Vegas, and it just so happened that's where he was going. We discussed that I needed to get my passenger to her family, and that I needed to get to a parts store. But if he could just get us to the city, we'd be very grateful. He asked if we had any money, and I told him I had about $40 for gas
and was going to get money there and had to get more anyway due to parts. I offered to pay him $60 for his troubles. He laughed and said that was more than enough, and we three piled into his truck. All went well on the drive to Las Vegas, and we all had small talk. When we reached the city, Hoss offered to go ahead and take my passenger to her parents as they were going to pay me for my trouble, and that would pay parts, a bus to my car, and Hoss's time and trouble. We were all agreeable. We arrived to drop off my passenger, and I stepped in with her for a brief moment to speak with her parents, who gave me $300, which was a lot more than I expected, and that was more than I made in a week. So when I went back to Hoss's truck, he gestured friendly like I jump in. He asked how it went, and I told him they paid me a lot more than I expected. He seemed to brush that off and suggested we get a beverage before getting to the parts store. It was a 7-Eleven, and I offered him a soda. He thanked me, and I hopped out and got us each a super big gulp, a monster-sized cup that seemed to hold 2 liters in each cup. Getting in the truck, I passed him his drink and sat in the passenger seat. Hoss said he knew where the parts store was, and he would take me there, to which he happily agreed. I thanked him repeatedly for being such great help. He just chortled and made small talk. In a short while, he turned off a main road and started down a dirt road with nothing but a very distant something. I asked why we were on the dirt road. He offhandedly mentioned it was a shortcut. At first, this made some sense, but the road turned slightly away from the distant building, and we were now in the middle of the desert. I was feeling uneasy but stayed firm as he asked me how much I was paid. I was holding my drink and took a sip. More than my paycheck. He slammed the brakes and reached his burly arm fast around my neck and shouted, "Give me your money, or I'ma kill you." Instinct and perception took over, and I tossed the near full iced big gulp in his face and his front. His grip loosened substantially, and my right hand went for the door handle, and the door opened and I rushed out. I had gotten the element of surprise and won my freedom. Hoss yelled out profanities at me, and I yelled my suggestion of his body being buried here by me. With that, he stepped on the accelerator and tore away from me. I was okay, and he was driving madly away. But here I was in the desert, at least a few miles away from anything, on a summer's day at midday, in clothes better suited to a cool evening. I chose a direction that seemed to be the closest to me and began walking. I have no idea how long it took, but by the time I was nearing my goal, it shone as a new set of homes. I was sweating terribly and just ready to drop. I was mad, I mean really mad about what happened. As I got closer to the nearest home, I saw a man standing there who was dark-haired and lean. He was just watching me walk out of the desert in black. I walked towards him as I got into earshot, and I called out for water, please. The man was holding a shovel, and obviously wary, and as I neared him, he asked who I was and why I was there. I gave a summary, and again asked for water. His garage was open, and he grabbed a cup and ran some water into it from the spigot of the hose. He reached it to me, and I greedily took it and guzzled. As I was in the shade, and the man was talking to me, I told him the whole story and how I ended up there. A sudden thought occurred to me, and I suddenly became concerned for the passenger lady. The homeowner was more at ease with me now, though understandably unwilling to invite me inside. He had an extension for his phone in his garage and allowed me to call the woman's family. I explained what Hoss had done and asked them for a favor of picking me up. They agreed, and I gave the address for where I was. They took my caution to be on the lookout. Sometime later they arrived and picked me up. I thanked the man for his kindness. I was lucky to be close enough to someone. He said not everyone was a bad person. I was taken to a parts store, bought what I needed, and taken to a Greyhound terminal. I thanked them and bought a ticket. A while later the bus arrived and I got aboard. I asked the driver to stop in Barstow. Sitting back, I reflected on what had happened and suddenly realized I was alone, and that psycho knew where my disabled car was in an abandoned place. It was not a safe place to be, but I had to get there. Barstow was close enough to where I was going, but not close enough to walk. I later found out I would have to get off at that exit, since it was a real exit off the highway. Live and learn. So I walked to a diner that was popular with big truckers and sat down, ordered a soda and a sandwich, and a man who was seating next to me asked what my story was, as I looked out of place the way I was dressed. I explained what happened and the man introduced himself. He was a war vet with non-working legs. He had special crutches by him and said he could take me to where my car was as it was on his way. He was driving a fifth-wheel truck hauling cars. I must have looked him oddly as he laughed and said, "Don't worry, I ain't going anywhere as fast with these legs." I laughed kindly with him and agreed. He added that he would help watch over as I fixed the car, just in case this hoss guy came back. In a short while we headed out, and true to his honor, he waited as I replaced my gasket, torqued the bolts, and added fluid. I then tested it with it running. Not the cleanest way to do it, but it was done. The old man at the store was gone. The sun was waning in the sky and my car was fixed. I thanked him again, and he told me as a soldier he kept his word, and to this day he remains the same. I felt he was honest and had a slight restoration of my faith in humanity. We both headed out at the same time, and I made my way home.
This terrifying account comes from the journals of Robert Dale Owens, who swore truth by it, and it's one of the eeriest sea legends ever recorded. In 1828, Robert Bruce, a rugged first mate from Torbay, England, was aboard a merchant ship heading west across the Atlantic. The crew had been at sea for nearly 6 weeks, and the air had grown sharp and cold as they approached the icy waters near Newfoundland. At noon one bleak day, Bruce and the captain took their sun measurements and descended into the cramped, breaking belly of the ship to calculate their position. The captain vanished into his cabin, while Bruce hunched over a desk in his tiny stateroom, focused on his logroom. Frustrated by a miscalculation, Bruce called out, "I've got our longitude and latitude. Does this match yours?" He called out again but received no answer. Turning his head slightly, Bruce saw who he assumed to be the captain sitting at the main desk in the adjacent cabin. But as he glanced, his breath caught in his throat. The man wasn't the captain. He wasn't anyone Bruce had ever seen. The stranger sat perfectly still in the captain's chair, calmly scribbling on a slate with his head slightly tilted down. Then, without a word, he slowly raised his eyes and stared directly into Bruce's. His expression was blank. Bruce felt a chill seize his entire body, and he backed away in a panic as he bolted up the stairs, slamming into daylight. The crew turned to stare as he emerged, pale and shaken, and the captain rushed over and asked what happened. "There's someone down there in your chair, a man I've never seen." "Bruce, that's impossible." But determined to prove it, they stormed back into the cabin together, which was empty, and every door remained locked, and after a complete search there was no trace of the person. Then Bruce spotted the slate on the desk, and clearly written in chilling block letters were the following words: "Steer to the northwest." The captain demanded every crew write a phase for comparison, but none matched the eerie, unnatural handwriting. Uneasy but unable to explain it, the captain ordered a course and changed towards the northwest. Hours later, the lookout screamed iceberg and a ship. They spotted a frozen, shattered wreck lodged in the ice. It was a Quebec ship bound for Liverpool, trapped for weeks. Her passengers were half dead, starving, frozen, and hopeless. As the rescue began, Bruce froze midship. One of the survivors climbing aboard was him, the man from the captain's chair. The same face, the same stare, and Bruce felt the blood drain from his body. Later, the captain handed the man the slate. "Write something for me, anything. How about steer to the northwest?" The man complied, smiling nervously. Then the captain turned the slate over. "Did you write this too?" The man stared at the ghostly message. "That's not mine, I only wrote on one side." "You sure?" "Yeah, what the hell is this?" Bruce stepped forward, voice shaking. "I saw you hours ago on the ship, sitting right there, writing that exact thing." The man turned white. He admitted he had fallen into a dreamlike sleep aboard the ice-locked ship, around the time that Bruce had seen the apparition. In his dream, he'd been on another ship. This one, he even described its layout perfectly before ever setting foot on it. The man had woken suddenly and told the others that help was coming. They thought he was delirious. But the writing on the slate, the course correction, had saved them all. No one ever figured out how the stranger's face appeared to be Bruce, or how the message ended upon the slate. Neither Bruce nor the man ever fully recovered from what they experienced, and to this day sailors will sometimes share the story of what happened.
When I was 19, I decided I wanted to move to South Dakota and get in on the ever-growing oil boom. My girlfriend at the time went with me. She found work quickly in a local restaurant, and I steadily drove to drilling gas rigs and inquiring about being hired. We lived in a train car with a couch for a bed. Then a co-worker of hers offered to let us live in her camper in the backyard. It just so happened her husband was a supervisor on the rig, and they actually hired me too. Her husband later came home for the weekend on the Friday before I was heading to work with him, and to make some good money. We got along well. We all went to bed at some point, and I slept on the couch to stay cool. At some point in the middle of the night, I felt someone shaking me by my arm. I rolled over and saw the most wonderful and warming sight. There was what appeared to be an angel standing next to me. It said over and over, "Do not run, do not run." I had no idea at the time what that meant. The next day I woke up to our ladies heading to work. Myself and my new boss decided to drive around and look at the sandstone sculptures. That was fun. Then we headed back to the house. When we got there was a 17-year-oldish girl hanging out in the house waiting for her boyfriend, their son. We all sat there for a while talking. Then, he became very aggressive, flirting with her. I told him to leave her alone. He then sprung out of his chair and ran upstairs. A feeling of dread came over me. I told the girl, "Whatever you do, don't run." He was back downstairs in a flash. He had a very large stainless steel 6-shooter in his hand, and he pointed it right at the young lady to my left. And he said, "Let's play a game." Then suddenly, like it burst out of me, I said, "Do me first." He turned the gun on me with the most wicked grin in his eyes that I've ever seen, and pulled the trigger right in front of me. Nothing happened. I was praying vigorously in my head to Jesus for protection. He then held the gun up to his head and pulled the trigger. It went off instantly, finishing his life. His blood and brains showered down upon me and the surrounding area. I checked his pulse and saw he still had the horrific grin on his face. I assumed the girl called 911 as the police in this small 300-person town arrived in a heartbeat. We were outside telling them what happened when the sheriff pointed out that I was covered in blood and what appeared to be brain matter too. I hadn't noticed. I was in shock. They made me strip my clothes on a tarp right there on the spot. I was then taken to the local police station and proceeded to be asked questions for about 3 hours. I was then informed that they determined the cause of death to be suicide. But then I was told that the 6-shooter was fully loaded and the bullet meant for me must have been a dud. They also informed me that there was a perfect silhouette of where I had been sitting and that around it was covered in blood. Then the craziest thing they told me was the bullet that went through his head came at me and went through the wall within inches of my head. They left me in my new orange jumpsuit they gave me and 2 men came into the room and they took me to a tiny fleabag motel in a blacked out unmarked car. They told me to stick around for the night and never come back. I was on the road home later that night in the wee hours, with just a story to tell and trauma for the rest of my life. It was 2008. My daughter was 16 and an all-star cheerleader, which meant that we traveled for competitions all across the US. We were living in Maryland at the time and heading to Ohio. I decided to drive instead of fly. It was way cheaper. We would drive the first 8 hours or so, cross the border into Ohio and stay in a hotel. Then we'd get up early and drive 2 hours to the competition. The hotel was only a few years old, a Marriott, and as soon as we entered the room, my daughter looked around and headed to the bathroom, walked out and said, "I don't like this room." So of course I'm mum and mention how new the hotel is and that it was nice and clean and comfortable. Honestly, I didn't understand. I couldn't understand why she didn't like it, because that's all she said several times. Anyway, we went to eat and came back to go to bed. Again, she's saying she doesn't like the room, and I'm thinking, ugh, teenagers. And oddly, she's using the bathroom with the door open and telling me not to walk over. Again, teenagers. As usual, I watch TV until I fall asleep. She is already asleep. I wish I could fall asleep that fast. Later, I turn the TV off and prepare myself to fall asleep when I hear her rustle in those crisp new sheets. Then again, it was loud, crisp, almost like a whooshing sound. I figured she was pulling those tightly tucked sheets out. I'm laying on my left side, her bed on my right, when the whooshing happens again loudly. So I turn to see what she's doing when I hear the whoosh going straight up between our beds, crisp as can be. And there, between our beds, is what I think is my daughter standing with the sheets over her head. What the heck is she doing, I'm thinking. I quickly realize it can't be her, because it's almost to the ceiling, and there's nothing under this sheet-like thin human structure, when suddenly it drops to the floor fast, making a swooshing sound, and it did it with a ripping effect. All of the white plummeting down. I was so freaked out. I sat up super fast, scared, confused, turning the light on, and there Christine was sleeping in her bed. I didn't know what to do. I turned the TV on, and when it was fully illuminated, I turned off the light as I was starting to wake her up. I was frozen in my bed. There was no way I was going to look around at that point. The TV would stay on all night. I was so afraid. My heart was pounding and my breath erratic, and it took me a while to calm down. I stayed awake a long time, my eyes constantly surveying the room. When I finally fell asleep, a depression on the corner of my bed, like someone sitting down, woke me. I didn't move much, just my eyes. I was scared and very cautious. I thought maybe it was Chrissy, but nothing was there. Again, I'm awake, then fall back to sleep. Early in the morning, before the alarm would sound, I felt someone bending down to me. Like, you can feel without hearing it type of movement. And then a kiss planted on my cheek. I froze, popped open my eyes, and nothing was there. It wasn't my daughter. At that point, it was time to leave. So I woke my daughter and said something to the effect of, "Good, I'm ready to go." We went to the lobby with our bags, got breakfast, as it was 6 a.m. While we're at the table, she says to me that she had a terrible night's sleep and that I kept her up. Now I feel bad and apologized for the TV. When she asks me, why did I keep sitting on the end of her bed during the night? And why did I kiss her on the cheek in the morning? Excuse me, what? It happened to her too. We sat there discussing what the depression felt like. The kiss, a man, and I think she thought I was messing with her. So I told her about the crisp sheet thing rising and falling when she blurts out, "I told you I didn't like the room. I knew it was bad." It was at that point that I realized why she didn't like the room. Not because she was a moody teenager, but because she felt something that I did not. She told me when she walked into the bathroom right away, she felt as if someone had died in there, that they took their own life, that it was dark and foreboding, and that's why she wouldn't close the door when she was in there. But what she hadn't clarified to me was why she hated the room so much. Honestly, she'd have just told me I'd have changed rooms, but here's an even creepier part. After we discussed this, I see a girl at the front desk and decide to go over and ask her if the hotel is haunted. Now, this was a new hotel, but I did anyway. The clerk said, "Which room are you in?" I answered and she stood still, looked at me and walked into the back room and never came out again. I stood there for 5 minutes. Nothing. We gathered our things to leave and she still hadn't come out. When we were walking out the sliding doors, I saw her peek her head out and pop it in again quickly. It was so bizarre. Was she messing with me? Who knows? I don't have a lot of paranormal experiences, but the one I have had did stick with me. It didn't feel like any foreboding or darkness in that room. It simply scared the crap out of me. Chrissy definitely locked into something I couldn't sense upon arrival, and I've always thought myself to be sensitive. I've told this story to many people, but Chrissy does not like hearing it at all. She doesn't discuss it. To her, it's over and done. But the truth is, we know it scared the daylights out of her too, which is why she doesn't want to relive it. Marriott does not own that property anymore. I looked it up on their website. I don't know why. Maybe, just maybe, too many stories have come from that hotel. My family have always been strong believers in the paranormal, which is why for the majority of my childhood, I was the odd one out. I never believed any of their encounters. I just took them all as silly stories they told me. The most ridiculous tale my parents had told me was how when I was free they found me at midnight, sat atop of the staircase talking to the ceiling. Apparently I was talking to my great aunt, who they found out had passed away at 11 p.m. When I was 17, I started working at a nursery as an apprentice in September. Now the building was originally an orphanage for boys from back in the 1800s and got shut down after World War II and was bought by the nursery owner in 1975. When I first joined, my co-workers would tell me about how the place was haunted and all the typical stories you'd hear about haunted places. Footsteps in rooms that are empty, seeing figures from the corner of your eye. I would just roll my eyes and play along with them. I had experienced nothing for 3 whole months. But my first encounter happened a week before Christmas. The nursery had shut early, but the staff had to stay back to take down the decorations, and I was in the baby room by myself on a ladder, taking down the dangling snowflakes from the ceiling. That's when I heard light footsteps coming up the stairs in the hallway and assumed it was the manager's daughter of 3 coming up to use the bathroom. I didn't hear anything more for another 10 minutes or so. I then heard the baby room door open and a few small footsteps entering the room. I saw a small figure from the corner of my eye and said, "I've got a few more snowflakes to take down if you want to help," and was coming down the ladder. But when I turned around, there was no one there. Just myself with the baby door wide open. I even checked the hallway. It weirded me out a bit, but I just assumed she'd come in and walked out without me hearing. But when I went back to ask the manager a little while later, she told me her daughter had gone home with her dad an hour earlier. This gave me a weird tingling feeling down my spine, but I just clued it up to me being tired. My next encounter would be a week after returning back from Christmas. I was covering in the preschool room, and we were leading a group of 15 in the line through the downstairs corridor to the garden outside. As they were walking, I noticed a little boy suddenly running into one of the side playing rooms. I called out and went after them, but when I stepped into the room and looked, it was empty. I panicked, thinking that they had hidden, but when I turned around to let one of my co-workers know, they were looking at me weirdly, even some of the kids. I explained what happened and they said that no one had run off, and everyone was still there. all 15 children. That properly freaked me out. And from then on, a whole string of events occurred, which has now made me a full believer. A lot more incidents of the little boy running from the line, always to the same room, at least 5 times since. I ignored it after the second time. There were many instances of small footsteps along the corridors and stairs, and of course, when I would go check, there would be no one there, and this was usually when the kids weren't even there at all. There was this one occasion when I was talking to a little girl in the toddler room when I felt someone tug the back of my shirt. When I turned around to see who wanted me, no one was there. This happened several more times afterwards. A few times I noticed the babies and toddlers just staring at the room's door, even some giggling and waving at something I couldn't see. The only element I didn't get was the sound of children's laughter, which a few of my old co-workers had heard, and quite frankly I'm glad I didn't. I was relieved when my apprenticeship came to an end. Since being at the nursery, I don't know if some form of energy has clung to me, or now that I'm a believer, I'm being made more aware. But I've seen and experienced more things since. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not though. This story takes place in northeast Oklahoma around 2009. I was 14 years old at the time, and back then my aunt and I did everything together. She was my best friend, my rock, my everything really. Our favorite thing to do in our boring rural town was just go driving around. I believe I had just finished school for the summer, as it was May, and she'd offered to take me on a celebratory drive around town. In my hometown, there's an old mental hospital that had been closed since the 1990s. It's located in more of a ruralish area, and I've always been fascinated by it. And she was too. She even worked there as a teenager. There's a prison located extremely close to it with guards in white trucks frequently driving the roads and preventing people from trying to sneak into the abandoned mental hospital. We both decided on driving around this abandoned mental hospital. It's just too cool and creepy. There's a cemetery where they mass buried many of the patients just beyond the hospital and the doctors' houses. Past the cemetery, everything gets rural. You're far from town by this point, and there's only a single lane, lone, winding road. We're driving, having fun, just talking about anything and everything. It's late afternoon by this point, probably 4:30. It's just like any old drive we had been on so many times. That's when I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a 90s white Jeep Cherokee behind us. It had seemingly come out of nowhere. We both shrugged it off and thought it might be a prison guard or something. It became unnerving the longer we drove. He never turned onto a side road, he just kept following us. I remember my aunt playing it calm, but I knew she was not fully freaking out. She kept asking, "Is he still following us?" There were times when I didn't see him and I'd say, "No, I don't see him." Then in the next minute he'd be right there behind us. He got close enough at one point that I could see his face. He was very big and bulky, about middle-aged, and I assumed white with a hat, wearing Carrera sunglasses, and his dashboard was covered in junk. We kept on driving further on this road through the middle of nowhere. There were several times we'd lose him, and we would feel so relieved. At one point we came to a railroad crossing on a hill. After we passed it, I didn't see him. We were so happy, and there he was again. He followed us for what felt like hours. If we sped up, so would he. I still get chills at the memory of looking in the rearview mirror and seeing his face. We were also in such a rural area that we could not get any cell phone signal. Finally, we emerged onto a highway. We had no idea where we were, but just so elated to get to a main road. We turned onto it, and my aunt sped off. I remember we got back to my mum's house and were full of fear and adrenaline. We frantically said we were out driving and this guy just started following us, and my aunt finally confessed how scared she was. We never told the police or anything, and my mum thought we were making a big deal out of nothing. But it was terrifying to be out in the middle of nowhere, with no cell phone service and a strange car following you for an extended period of time. I remember we spoke afterwards about it, like what if she'd run out of gas or her car broke down? What the hell would we have done? I'm glad we never had to find out.
Back in 2015, I was living on Orcas Island, Washington, a stunning but isolated place in the Salish Sea, northwest of Seattle. In the heart of the island, hidden beneath a dense canopy of fir and cedar, lies Cascade Lake, a deep, glassy body of water that seems to swallow the sky when the sun dips below the trees. My friends and I had spent the summer jumping off cliffs, swimming in the bottomless depths and lounging on its shores, unaware of just how much we didn't know about the place. We were fooling around on the wooden bridge over the lake, the sun barely a sliver on the horizon. There was a little fish, aggressive and frantic, that kept swarming and nipping at us, like we were invading something we shouldn't. That's when my dog Duke did something to make my stomach turn. We had moved onto some rocks at the shoreline, but Duke had stayed back at the bridge. He saw where we'd gone and then just launched himself into the lake, churning the water so violently it almost looked like he was running across the surface. And this is a dog who hated getting wet. Yet he was swimming as if something were chasing him, as if something were down there beneath him rising. When he finally pulled himself onto the rocks, he was shaking, not from cold, but from fear. A friend pointed out a strange, gnarled root ball sticking out further down the shoreline. He commented that it looked like a dragon head. I walked closer, stepping carefully along the uneven rocks, and sure enough, the way the roots twisted, it did look like a dragon, horns and a long snout, with deep grooves that could have been ancient eyes. I was about to turn away when I felt something. A primal, stomach-sinking sensation like something had just locked its gaze on me. I turned around. 5 feet from me, floating in the water, was a log that hadn't been there before. Only, it wasn't a log. It was alive. Its surface was slick, covered in dark moss that made it blend into the water. But as I stared, the illusion broke. Beneath the disguise, I saw a long, scaly snout, reptilian eyes, something like ears or fins pressed back against the skull, and it was studying me. For one horrifying moment, neither of us moved. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. Then Duke and Cookie saw it. They exploded into frantic barking, charging the water, their bodies tensed in pure terror. But the thing didn't flinch. It was still. I don't remember backing away. I just remember running, my dogs at my heels, breath tearing through my lungs. When we got back, it was gone. The next day, I asked an old friend from Bellingham if he'd ever heard of water dragons. As a joke, I thought it was just superstition. He didn't even hesitate. He said, dead serious, we had to tie up goats near the lake to keep them away. I laughed, and he didn't. Then I remembered something else. In the years before this happened, 2014, a man had been found dead near those same rocks, alone in his tent, covered in bite marks. The official explanation? Otters. There are no natural predators on Orcas Islands, no wolves, no bears, just the water, and what's beneath it. Months later, my then girlfriend, who had grown up on the island, told me something offhandedly. One day while driving past Cascade Lake, she saw it too. A long, black shape, gliding silently beneath the surface. There are rumors that these lakes connect to the sea through underground tunnels, and they're deep, deeper than anyone knows, and that sometimes something moves through them. I never swam in Cascade Lake again. My mum and I had a really long day of running errands, and were heading home for the evening. We discussed stopping at our local convenience store for gas and drinks. The closer we got to the convenience store,
We both simultaneously brought up the fact that we were both tired and just wanted to go home and crash. I even remember just exactly what my mum said. We can just get gas in the morning. Little did either of us know that it was probably the best decision we had ever made. The next morning we got up and sat in the living room to watch TV. The news opens with a story of how 3 teens robbed, shot, and killed a convenience store clerk and severely wounded a customer. The convenience store? The very same one my mum and I had planned to stop at on the way home, about 5 to 10 minutes before the robbery and shooting took place. My mum and I were shaken beyond belief. I have absolutely no doubt had we stopped there, neither of us would have lived to tell the tale. I lost my mum in January of 2019, and I'm grateful every day that it wasn't 21 years earlier. I used to work in audiovisual in Chicago, where I was assigned a night gala at the esteemed Astoria Hotel set in the opulent Grand Magnolia Ballroom. Legends whispered about a tragic tale involving a woman who met her demise by leaping from the hotel's heights, supposedly after discovering her husband's affair in the very same area. As I sat up alone amidst the grandeur, I couldn't shake off the chilling atmosphere. My task seemed routine at first, placing speakers and monitors, but then the inexplicable began to unfold. One by one, my monitors were mysteriously unplugged from the wall sockets. I shrugged off the occurrences initially, attributing them to technical glitches or mere coincidence. Yet as I secured them with tape to prevent further disturbance, a spine-tingling event occurred. As I was on the cusp of completing the setup, all 6 monitors simultaneously detached from the walls, defying logic. A surge of fear gripped me like never before, propelling me to flee the room in terror. Although I returned to fulfill my duties and complete the show, my nerves remained on edge. Hastening through the tasks and avoiding lingering in the empty ballroom, I ensured to leave before the banquet concluded, unwilling to face solitude once more. We're up at my father-in-law's for Christmas. He lives in South Jersey in a pretty remote area just north of Bryn State Forest. It's quiet and always a little eerie, but felt especially weird with the overcast weather and unseasonable warmth for the last few days. We did Christmas dinner at my brother-in-law's and got back pretty late. Because of the radiator heater and outside temperatures, we slept with the windows open. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and as I was drifting back to sleep, I heard a low wail, building in volume for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. I figured it was just an odd-sounding bird and tried to go back to sleep, but it happened twice more over the course of about 5 minutes. I was basically able to put it out of my head and start drifting back to sleep when I heard a loud, shrill blast like a too-high elephant's trunk. At that point I shot up, heart racing. I knew I had to close the window and took a beat to build up to it. When I dragged myself out of bed, I peeked through the shutters before I reached to shut the pane. Whatever it was had tripped a motion sensor light at the back of the property and was half illuminated, standing maybe 100 feet from the back door, right at the tree line. It was cloaked, with its head partially shrouded. The bottom of its face looked flat and round, like the back of a dinner plate, with another smaller half, uncovered circle at its center. I immediately slammed the window shut and it didn't move. It just stood there with its face tilted towards the window. I shut the blinds and crept into bed, basically hid until the sun came up and I didn't hear any more sounds. I dared another look out the window after, but the figure was gone, and I managed to drift back to sleep for a few hours. Has anyone seen anything like this? Or know what it could have been? When I was 17, I was driving in one of those small towns without the community feel. It was a toxic place rampant with drug addiction and crime. I learned from a young age to watch my back and where to not go past dark or ever. This town held a lot of trauma for me. Some trauma even scarier than the incident I'm about to share. I left this town a few short months after this happened, and I would never think of going back after this point. For context, I am female and was working a lot and finishing up my senior year, and we didn't have a working washer or dryer at home, so I had to go to the laundromat to do my laundry. I lived on the outside of town. It took a whole 5 minutes to get into town, but we were so secluded and there were no street lights, and I lived on a street between two mountains. We were down the street from this abandoned dairy farm. We had acres to ourselves and we were really secluded. It was so dark out there, and there was only my street and the cross street to get to my street. So you knew when a car was on the road. One afternoon, I found some time to take my laundry to the laundromat and took my mum and brother's laundry with me, so my mum wouldn't have to do it during her work week. This meant I had 3 times the laundry to do, and it would take longer at the laundromat, but there was a good Hastings next door, so I didn't worry too much as long as I was able to leave before dark, as it wasn't a very good idea to be out at that time. By the time I left, the sun was almost down, so it all worked out, and by the time I was on the cross street to get to my street, it was completely dark, and I was all alone out there. I thought I turned onto my street, and within seconds there was someone behind me, as close as they could be to my vehicle without hitting me, and they had their brights on. This confused me, as I had seen no other cars on the street before I turned onto my own. It was like their lights were off until they were directly behind me. This gave me a pit in my stomach, so I sped up, but they kept up behind me. This was a windy, dark road, and my headlights were poor, so I was really starting to get anxious. I made a judgment call and drove right past my driveway. I didn't feel right possibly alerting some creep to where I live with my mum and baby brother, especially since the cell reception was so poor out there. The person behind me was still as close as they could get to my bumper, and I kept speeding up. I knew that up ahead there was a fork in the road. Going straight would lead me to the downtown area, and it's the way people go when they're heading that way. To go to the left, you entered a residential area with only a few homes, and a road that only really allowed 1 car at a time. At the last second, I turned onto this street without turning my blinker on, in hopes that the car behind me would keep going straight. They turned with me. By this point, I was very scared, but still hopeful that maybe the car behind me lived in the area. We were going close to 50 miles an hour now, and just kept speeding up, as the car behind me really wasn't backing off, but staying as close as they could. They stayed so close that I couldn't even tell what was the make of their vehicle, or whether they were driving a car or SUV or truck. I definitely couldn't tell who was in it. I couldn't understand why they weren't backing off, and I was afraid that if I slowed down, they'd rear-end me. All of a sudden, I see a home directly in front, and I had to turn left or crash into the home in front. Luckily, my car made the turn. I kept going and made a left to get onto the road that leads downtown. The car was still behind me. They didn't live in that neighborhood, and at this point I'm sure they're following me, and I make the decision to drive to the sheriff's office, but I'm not sure how to get there. We're going around 60 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and we start to pass a street that I finally recognize that will lead to the sheriff's office. So I turn, but I turn so late that I might as well have made a U-turn. Finally, the car behind me can't make the turn and they keep driving. I drove around and made a lot of turns to ensure the car wouldn't end up driving behind me again. Finally, I pulled my car over and cried. I was safe this time, but I returned home terrified, and it changed the way I drive to this day. I moved to a more populated city, and I live in a large apartment complex, but I will still drive past my apartment when I get a weird feeling about someone behind me. Anytime someone pulls into the apartment behind me, I drive right past my apartment and circle the complex until I can park with no one watching. My paranoia possibly saved me, and my mum and baby brother from something that could have been so much worse. Pay attention to those behind you. Waste gas and drive past your home if you're scared. It might save your life.
This story takes place back in 2013. This all happened in Mastic Beach, which is in Long Island, New York. Mastic was extremely far from safe. One day in August I went to Mastic Beach. Now this beach is extremely filthy and has rarely ever been cleaned. It was the closest beach from where we lived. I couldn't go to a beach further because the other closest beach was about a 35-minute drive away, and I had a learner's permit at the time. I really wasn't supposed to be driving alone, but the beach was only 5 minutes away and there were no police in the area. I arrived at the beach. I saw there were no cars in sight, so I took a chair, towel and handbag out of my car and placed it in the sand. After placing these items down, I walked my way over to the water and put my feet in it. I walked further into the water, and now my knees were in it. I thought about swimming for a second, but I saw the water was murky and had algae in it. So what I did was that I walked out of the water and back to shore. I got on my chair and dried myself off with a towel. I wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon, because it was hot out, and it was very sunny. Instead of going back in the water, I decided I wanted to walk along the long beach area. So I proceeded. About 10 minutes into my walk, it started to smell. At first, I figured it was just some trash laying around near me or a dead fish. As I continued to walk forward, the smell kept getting stronger. The whole time walking, I didn't look in any other direction but in front. As I was still walking, looking at only 12 o'clock, I felt my foot hit something hard and hairy. I looked down, and what I saw was the kind of things you read in horror stories. Right below me was the lifeless head of an old woman. Her eyes and mouth were open wider than humanly possible. I saw this and I screamed like a little girl and ran so fast like I was on steroids. When I got back to my chair, I threw up immediately from running so fast, from the gut-wrenching sight that I saw. I got my phone from my bag and called the police, then connected to a 911 dispatcher and told her everything she had to know. She then told me to stay put, as the police would be on their way. When the police arrived, I told them where the dead body was. They thanked me and told me to go home because they were going to shut down the beach as it was under investigation. I would say an estimate of 3 weeks had passed when one morning I turned on the news, like I would do every morning, and I saw that the dead woman had finally been identified. Her name was Diane Ross. She was 63. It was also revealed that the cause of her death was murder, and she was stabbed in the back of her neck. I was in disbelief. They were never able to trace any DNA prints to who killed her, and the killer had never been caught, which is the scariest part of this. As of today, I never went back to that beach and never will. I also moved to a different and more wealthy town in Long Island that is far safer, where the crime rate is very low. And although this was 11 years ago, it still feels like yesterday, as time flies by fast.
We were at a Sportsman warehouse in Colorado with our parents. I was 14 and my little brother was 12. We were on a trip to see family, so we were about done walking around and decided to sit down in the camping chair aisles while we were waiting for our parents to be done shopping. While we were sitting there, a lady that looked cracked up on some sort of drug walked up to us and started asking us odd questions. She asked us, "Where's the Colorado River? Can you show me on the map in front where the Colorado River is?" There was a map of the US in front of the store right by the entrance. She kept telling us to walk up there with her because she needed help finding the Colorado River. We were both weirded out and started to walk to find our parents. She kept following us and didn't stop. We found our parents and I told them what happened. My mum started to yell at the lady, but she wasn't even going away after that. We checked out and started leaving the store. When we walked out, we saw the creepy lady and 4 men ran out of the store near a van that was hidden out of the way of any camera view. 2 of the men were waiting outside the store, and that is when I realized what was happening. The lady wanted my little brother to go to the front of the store so that the 2 men could take him and run to the van. I'm so glad we followed our instincts and didn't follow her. And to this day I'm very cautious when I go into town, especially because I live on the border of Mexico and Arizona. Don't talk to strangers even if you're an adult. You never know how many people might be in on the abduction. This took place on October 1st, 2021. We go to Las Vegas frequently because we only live a few hours away in California, and we were heading there for a typical excursion. I enjoy trying new food or staying at a different hotel each time. Over the years, we've stayed at nearly every hotel on the Strip. Some of these hotels are decades old, dating back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, so understandably we've witnessed the occasional strange noise, smell, or bump in the night. But the strangest thing that ever happened was the newest edition. Resorts World opened in June of 2021, and I was excited to stay there because it was something genuinely new for both of us. It was also our first time traveling post-pandemic, so we spurged a little and stayed at the Comrade side of the hotel, which was marketed as an affordable luxury hotel. It was a beautiful room, with all new technology embedded into the room to make things convenient and fun. I couldn't have been more pleased with the room. We unpacked, explored the resort downstairs a bit and did some gambling, ate dinner, and then I headed up to the room to get ready for bed. While I did that, my boyfriend stayed downstairs at the resort to do some more gambling and drinking. He usually stays up a lot later than me, so this was pretty normal. While I was laying in bed on my phone, I started to hear noises. Most of the noises were common hotel noises like pipes in the walls, bumps from the floor above, plumbing, and then another room start their shower, standard stuff. But some of the noises were not normal. Mainly I could hear creaking from the bathroom as if someone was there standing or walking, almost like they were standing at the sink getting ready for bed, moving around like a normal person. I didn't really notice it though, until the sounds started to move towards me. Leaving the bathroom and moving into the bedroom, it sounded like footsteps approaching, but they were slow and uneven. I looked up from my phone and didn't see anything. I reasoned with myself that it was nothing, but something was off. It just felt off. Like I said before, we came to Las Vegas frequently, and we've stayed at nearly every hotel, but I've never felt creeped out like this. Even though my mind was being rational, it's just the floor, it's nothing. My heart rate was going up. I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't control it. It was like something was in the room with me, giving me a terrible feeling. I stared into the darkness for a few minutes and could still hear the steps coming closer. I was staring right at it, but there was nothing there. They were moving so slowly, and they were approaching the foot of the bed. I could feel the goosebumps. I couldn't even blink. The footsteps stopped at the foot of the bed, and then the room fell eerily quiet. Completely silent. But whatever it was still there. It was at the foot of the bed, just there. Was it watching me? What were its intentions? My phone frozen in my hand. I didn't even want to look away. I was so scared. I don't know how much time passed. I was just staring at the empty, silent hotel room. But eventually I managed to text my boyfriend and asked for him to come up, that I was getting spooked by myself. He said he would. This gave me some comfort, and I tried to get my courage back to calm down. I could hear common hotel sounds again, and that was comforting too. Perhaps the thing left while I distracted myself. When my boyfriend came to the room, he teased me for being spooked. We had a laugh and he got ready for bed, and I felt better, and mostly forgot about what happened. I think we both agreed the noises were just because the hotel was new and hadn't been lived in very much. However, one thing we both feared in every Las Vegas hotel was a break-in. So my boyfriend put his giant hydro flask water bottle in front of the entry door. We do this at every hotel, so that if someone tries to sneak in, which happens a lot in Las Vegas, they would knock over the loud water bottle and startle us awake. Finally, we both went to sleep. I was fast asleep when something jolted me awake. It was my boyfriend thrashing out of bed, throwing the covers back, yelling, "Hello? Who's there?" He rushed his feet and headed straight for the entry door. I was still half asleep and asked, "Huh?" I was squinting because the room was very bright now, but my boyfriend looked distraught and didn't answer. He went to the bathroom, checked behind the door, the closet, the couch area. It was obvious something had spooked him. "What happened? The lights turned on. Did you do that?" "No, maybe you bumped them in your sleep." "No, they all came on." Something, somehow, had triggered all the lights in our hotel room to turn on in the middle of the night. The bathroom, the bedroom, the little hallway in front of the door, everything. What could have possibly switched on all the lights at once? We sat in confusion for a few moments. Then I tried to think clearly. Did someone try to break into the room? No. The stuff in front of the door hadn't been moved. The water bottle was still upright. Was there a master button you could press that turned everything on? No. Were there two separate master buttons, one for the bedroom and one for the bathroom? Maybe it was a wiring issue. After all, it was a new hotel. Perhaps that sort of thing happens. We decided to call front desk. We weren't even sure what to say to the clerk on the phone, so we just told her all the lights had turned on and woken us up, and that we hadn't pressed any of our light switches. She herself sounded pretty confused, and asked if we wanted someone to be sent up to take a look at it. At this point it was 3 or 4 in the morning, so we said no. She said okay, and took note of our call and wrote down the issue. We hung up, sat in silence for a while as we were both creeped out, but did our best to go back to sleep. The next day we spoke about what happened, but we couldn't come to any definite conclusion. To this day I'm still puzzled by it. The front desk never contacted us to tell us how the issue was resolved. It may very well be that the new hotel was still working out its wiring. But what were those eerie footsteps coming towards me in the middle of the night? Was it a phantom messing with us? I wish I remembered the room number, so that I can request never to stay in there again. You know, just in case. This happened when I was 13 and in the 8th grade and in middle school. The one I went to was about a 15-minute walk away, so not very far. My brother and I grew up in East LA in a small house that had a metal gate, and both the front and back doors had black metal screen door and a wooden door. During the day we would always leave the wooden door open and have the black metal door closed and locked, except this day. That day I came home from school and had about an hour before anyone else would be home. I was really thirsty, so I rushed inside, grabbed a drink and sat down at the kitchen table, which was about 10 feet away from the front door. I heard the metal gate open and was surprised as no one should have been coming home that early. I got up to see who it was and saw an older man in his 60s. He had short white hair and a long white beard. He was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt, torn jeans and sunglasses, and I remember thinking he looked a lot like Santa Claus but dirty and creepy. He knocked on the metal screen door and asked if my parents were home. I was a young kid and said they weren't. He got a smile on his face and said that he collected donations for needy children. I told him I was sorry but didn't have any money. He said sometimes children donated toys. I said I didn't have any old toys to donate. He insisted that I must have some toys I didn't want anymore. It was beginning to creep me out, and I noticed I hadn't locked the door when I came inside. I tried to keep my cool, and I slowly and carefully locked the door. I kept him talking so he wouldn't notice, and a minute or two later, he wouldn't leave, so I decided I would pretend and check for toys, and then say I didn't have any, in the hopes he would leave. I told him I'd go check, and as I turned and took a few steps down the hall, I clearly heard him yank at the door trying to open it. I didn't want him to know I'd heard him, so I kept walking down the hall and into the room. I didn't have a cell phone, and the only phone in the house was in the kitchen. I thought about what to do and decided to stick with my plan. After 2 or 3 minutes, I walked out, hoping he'd left. Nope. Creepy Santa was still there. I told him sorry, but I didn't find anything. He sighed and said, all right, and that he would check in another time. He left staring at my house. My brother and a few of his friends finally came walking down the street. As my brother came inside and his friends kept walking down, the man finally walked away, and he'd been staring at the house for the last 45 minutes at least. When I told my brother what happened, he walked outside to take a look, and the creepy Santa man was now gone. When my mum came home, we told her what happened and she called the cops, but they said just to call back if he showed up again, and thankfully he never did.
This happened to my mum's friend. One day the friend and her sister were driving on a freeway, and the car crashed and flipped and rolled over 5 lanes. My mum's friend was the only one conscious, and she was trapped under the steering wheel, and her sister's head was bleeding badly. She said a normal-looking man wearing white appeared out of nowhere, came up to them, and took off his shirt to wrap around the sister's head, and then he left. When the paramedics arrived, they asked who wrapped the sister's head, and she told them. The paramedics asked where he went, and she pointed to the direction he walked. The paramedics said they'd just come from that direction and no one was on the road for miles. They also said that he wrapped her head in such a perfect way that she would have bled out had he not done so.
This is my mother's story. I've done my best to adapt her words, though even now, my father refuses to talk about it. He gets visibly uncomfortable if anyone brings it up, his expression tightening, his hands gripping whatever's in front of him, like he's bracing for something to return. It happened around 20 years ago. My parents had taken a trip to a tropical beach town, staying at a modest hotel with a small camping area out back. That night the beach wasn't empty. People were scattered along the sand, silhouettes faint in the dim light, talking in low voices, some laughing, some just staring at the sea. My parents sat together, feeling the warm sand beneath them, breathing in the heavy night air. And then it arrived. At first they didn't notice. It had been standing near the water, barely distinguishable from the shadows, but it moved in a way that was wrong. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and wrapped in a long black overcoat that billowed slightly. Despite the absence of wind, the way it walked wasn't smooth. It was stiff and mechanical, as if it wasn't used to the motion. It didn't shuffle through the sand, it glided. My mother nudged my father and they both fell silent, watching it as it approached. It stopped abruptly, as if freezing in place, mere meters away. At that distance they could make out even more details, or rather, lack thereof. The overcoat's collar was high, nearly covering its face. What little was visible was pale and smooth, too smooth, lacking the imperfections of human skin. There were no defining features, no nose, no mouth, just 2 deep-set black eyes. And then it turned its head. Not gradually like a person would, it snapped to the side, its gaze locking onto them with unnatural precision, as though it had just noticed they were watching. My mother felt something tighten in her chest. It was looking at them but not seeing them, not like a person would. It felt like it was reading them, dissecting them. She wanted to speak, to ask who it was, what it was doing there. But before she could, it turned away and slid forwards. Not walked, not ran, slid. The thing didn't seem to touch the ground. It moved with an eerie, fluid speed, gliding towards the water without a single misstep. The coat swayed, but they still couldn't see its feet, if it even had any. And then the same unnatural smoothness. It reached the water's edge and kept going. It didn't wade in, it didn't sink. It floated over the waves, picking up speed, vanishing into the blackness of the ocean. My father, a staunch atheist and skeptic, sat frozen beside my mother. Then something in him snapped. Without thinking, he bolted up and ran after it. My mother shouted for him to stop, panic rising in her throat. She watched as he sprinted towards the shore, chasing after the impossible as if trying to force it to be something real, something rational. But by the time he reached the water, it was gone. He stood there panting, staring into the endless dark. He stayed like that for a long time, fists clenched, shoulders heaving as if waiting for something to come back. Eventually he turned around and walked back, his face ashen, his lips pressed into a tight, colorless line. He never spoke of it again. My mothers looked at the others on the beach, expecting them to be just as shaken. But no one else seemed to notice. The conversations continued, the laughter, the idle chatter. It was as if the thing had only wanted them to see it. And they did. But they never should have. This happened around 6 years ago. My family owns a flower and produce shop, and we travel to farmers markets sometimes. Most of the family are not well enough to pick in the garden and do heavy loading, so we often hire people for the summers. My uncle hired this guy called Kevin. He was in his late 30s and down on his luck. He was going through a divorce and needed some extra income. He was very nice, almost too nice. He was actually camping on our land because his ex-wife wanted to have their house. At this time I was around 16 years old. One day he found me in an alcove type spot where no one else was around and gave me his card with his personal number if I ever wanted to hang out. He was very insistent that we should do it that day after work and kept nagging at me for my phone number. I was immediately creeped out by this and politely told him we would see, just to get him away from me. I want to clarify that he knew I was underage. I immediately told my mum, who kind of brushed it off, but he gave me bad vibes. A few days after this, he didn't show up for work and called a few times. After no contact whatsoever, we read in the newspaper a day or two later that he crashed his ex-wife's birthday celebration and tried to kill her. She drove to the nearest police station and he gave chase, actually crashing into parked police cars in his haste. He is still in prison, and I'm really glad that I did not have the pleasure of hanging out with him. My brother used to work in housekeeping at a historic inn. He told me on various occasions he would be trying to clean when he'd see something out of the corner of his eye or in a mirror. Beds would untuck themselves when he turned his back, and on several occasions he'd hear footsteps behind him, but when he turned to look there'd be no one there. He'd be vacuuming the floors and carpets for the machine to suddenly turn off. Sometimes when he was around a corner, he assumed that the cord had snagged, but there'd be several times where the cord had just simply been unplugged from the wall and not been pulled at all. It became too much for him, and one day he worked up the courage to speak about it with his manager. When he did, she just replied, "Oh, ignore that. It's happened forever." Not exactly the words of comfort he wanted to hear, but there you go. This happened in the fall of 2006. I was visiting Savannah, Georgia, and went on a ghost tour. While we were at the graveyard at night, the tour guide was telling us some stories about the people buried there. There was enough light around for us to see a bit, and out of nowhere I saw a pair of legs and feet walking out from behind her. The figure just casually walked by and vanished. It looked like the figure was wearing a very old pair of boots, like maybe they would expect a soldier to be wearing. I was 13 at the time, and just stood there in disbelief as to what I had seen. After I unfroze, I realized I should try and take a picture, but the figure had already vanished. I was so freaked out and didn't think anyone would believe me, so I just kept it to myself. I never really believed in ghosts, but this 10,000% confirmation for me that they were real. A few times over the years, I tried to look at reviews of the tours to see if anyone has seen the same thing, but no luck. I know there have been a lot of ghost sightings in Savannah, but I do wonder if anyone has seen this particular apparition.
This happened 3 years ago during COVID time. It was my son's birthday, and we were all in quarantine due to being exposed to someone who had COVID. Because of that, we had to cancel our plans. We decided to take a drive, as we love driving around in the country and hiking, and went to an old church and Masonic lodge that is not in use at all, with its hometown being famous for a big goat statue mounted on top of the steeple. The statue was a gift from someone in Dundee, Scotland, a very old place. No one was around, so my son and I decided to take a look about. We got to ring this huge brass bell by pulling a rope. My boyfriend and other son were far away from us in the empty parking lot. We left, and they were amazed how loud the bell was. We kept driving and exploring until it got dark. My eldest son said he wanted to stop at the graveyard and then go ring the bell one more time. It was his birthday, so I told him he could do as he pleased. We walked to the graveyard, paid respect to the extremely old graves, and even picked up trash, then just sat down on the road and went back to the Masonic Lodge/Goat Church. We pulled it again, and no one was around. The church is right by the busy highway, no sidewalk, steep stairs or anything. My boyfriend and I decided to stay by the van to smoke a cigarette, and I could see the black outlines of my boys walking towards the front of the church. Well, suddenly, out of nowhere, there were what looked like 3 more young men/teen boys walking towards my kids and approaching them quickly, as though they knew my kids. Well, of course, my first instinct was to go over there and make sure they weren't up to no good, but I also wondered where the hell they came from. I walked towards them to make sure all was well, and I heard the bell ring. Then suddenly one of the unknown silhouettes charged at my eldest son, and when this happened, my boyfriend ran with his knife, yelling, "Hey!" at the people. He ran around the corner to approach the group, and I was behind him but not as fast. As I approached the steps, my boyfriend and my kids were starting to run to the car. There was no one there but my family, and I asked, "Where are they?" They just screamed at me to run. I repeatedly asked, "Where are the people?" "There are no people, run!" On our way home, we talked about this insane experience the whole time. We all saw 3 people walking up to my kids right next to them. It looked like they had all planned to meet there. They were walking as a group until one started running towards my son with intent. But my boys never saw them. There was no one there. There is no way they couldn't have noticed them, and there was nowhere for them to hide after. It's all very open and there are no hiding spots. The boys also described how when they reached the steps, it felt like a dream. They got nervous and they quickly rang the bell before my boyfriend got to them. The big brass bell is very loud and can be heard far and wide. Both boys rang it. I only heard it once, and I saw 3 people vanish. My boyfriend and youngest son felt nervous and negative and scared the whole way home. My eldest son, the birthday boy, and I were excited and felt no malignancy whatsoever. My eldest and I always have loved things paranormal, but tonight removed that little piece of doubt in the back of my mind, as I never thought something like that would happen to me. We prayed for protection on the way home. You never know, guys. Anything can happen. It's been many years now, and for context, a cenote is a sinkhole where people can go swimming. We went as a group of friends, and honestly everything seemed normal at first. The cenote was beautiful, like something out of a travel magazine. The water was crystal clear, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, making the surface sparkle. I couldn't really swim, so I decided to sit on this large rock near the edge of the water. It was warm and a little rough, but it felt safe. One of my friends sat next to me, since she wasn't much of a swimmer either.
We just hung out there chatting and watching the others have fun in the water. At first, I thought I felt something touch my foot. It wasn't soft, but it wasn't rough either. I yanked my leg back immediately and looked around, but the water was calm with no sign of anything. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I imagined it, or a fish brushed by. A few minutes later, my friend screamed. I turned just in time to see her sliding off the rock into the water. She grabbed me as she went down, instinctively clutching my arm for dear life. And that's when I felt it. Something was pulling both of us down. I swear there were hands, not one but several of them, tugging at our legs and dragging us towards the center of the cenote. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could feel it, sharp bony fingers gripping and pulling. The water suddenly felt deeper, darker and colder. I couldn't breathe, neither could she. She was thrashing and I was trying to hold on to her while figuring out how to get my head above water, but it was like something was sucking us down into a whirlpool, and I thought I was going to pass out. Finally, our friend noticed and rushed over, and I remember feeling them grab me, but it wasn't easy. They were struggling to pull us up. They later told me they felt it too. Something was fighting back, pulling us the other way. Somehow, they got us out. My friend was spluttering and barely conscious, and I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. I felt like my lungs were on fire. Then I sat on the edge of the cenote, soaking wet and scared out of my mind, while they just tried to make sense of what had happened. Even now, some 14 years later, I still don't know what to make of it. Some people say the cenotes are mystical, and they're connected to something bigger or darker. I don't know if that's true. But I'm definitely never going near one again, and never went swimming after that. At the time of this story, I was around 9. I'm from Chinese descent, and my family was going to Canada to see my family and Niagara Falls. I have random flashbacks to this incident, but I randomly had a nightmare about it yesterday, which brought it all to the forefront of my mind. It was in the afternoon, and my father asked me to get the laundry for him down the street from our apartment. I have crappy parents, so if I would have said no, there'd have been severe consequences. He gave me a bag and I left. I had no money or phone, just a chocolate bar and a bag. I remember so clearly. I was wearing a pink unicorn t-shirt with glitter and denim shorts. I was pretty tall for my age, but still pretty thin. The laundromat was near a McDonald's. It has a huge window to see inside. I head inside, and it still had a while until the clothes would be done, so I sit on the bench and eat my chocolate bar. This dude comes in with a backpack. He has a white tank top and red shorts. I don't mind him and continue eating. I noticed he was staring at me for a while, but he couldn't possibly be bad. My mum always said that bad people looked like your stereotypical homeless person and looked creepy. He was pretty good looking and fit, so he's probably just confused. That's when he comes up to me and says, "Hello, where are your parents?" I lied and told him that they'd be back soon, better safe than sorry. He was standing a few feet away from me and says, "I've never seen you here. Are you visiting?" "No, my laundry machine at home is broken." Then it started getting weird. He puts his backpack down, and I realize it's quite empty. I could see the man was ripped. I put the chocolate away and get up to check on the laundry, and it takes a few minutes. He comes closer and then asks, "Are you Asian?" There's no point in lying. I look like a stereotypical Asian child and nod. The next lines I could still hear to this day. "I love Asian women. They're so pretty. I want one for a wife." He reaches into his bag and pulls out some candy. "Here, I see you like this." He tried handing it to me. This is kinda messed up, but when my grandma babysits for me, she always watches this show where men give women food or liquid, the woman eats it and she gets unconscious and the man does whatever. So at this point, I realize it's an issue and begin looking for excuses to leave. It's then that I look out the window and see a teen McDonald's employee outside eating, so I tell the guy, "Oh, let me ask my brother." I walk out and the man is following me. The teen looks at me, puts down his sandwich, and I try to be as innocent and straightforward as possible. I tell the teen, "This man wants to give me candy. Should I take it?" The teen looks at the man and then at me. I try to get him on the same page. Mom said not to take candy from a stranger, but he looks nice. The teen gets it, looks at the man and goes, "Yeah, she's not supposed to have candy, but thank you though." The man, having no shame at all, "Oh, you're her brother? Is she adopted? Here, take my number, if you ever want to get her off your hands," and hands the teen a paper. A crowd is starting to form, and the man leaves. The teen asks if he should call the police, but I convince him not to because my parents would punish me. So the teen walks me to the laundromat to get my clothes, tells me to come into the store with him, and explains to his manager, who he gives the paper to, and the manager lets him leave so he can walk me home. I get to the street and tell him that's my hotel. I thank him and leave. As I was walking back, he stood there, making sure I was safe. To this day, I would like to think that they called the police after I left, and the man is now arrested, but I will never know. To the random McDonald's employee, thank you for saving my life. I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. I drive Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. It was Christmas Eve of 2020, and I was running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mum's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. When I get a ride request, it was a pickup from this kind of lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive, I find my passenger, and he has all of his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all of his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because the lease was in her name. So I was taking him to a hotel. Now in my city, we have a street that is well known for its vices, be it sex workers, drugs, gangs, weapons, seedy motels, the works. We get to the motel, and he asks for me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man. I'll confess I break the rules a little when it came to Lyft. I had a gun hidden in a concealed holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reasons being Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people tried to fight me, rob me, and all other kinds of things. But those are stories for another time. The motel happened to be on this seedy street I just mentioned. Homeless people were everywhere, and there was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against a building. I'm a big fan of true crime, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so I help the guy out, and I drive to his door. As I just said, the guy had a lot of stuff, so I started helping him unload his stuff. While on my second trip to get the things, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to, and one of the ladies pounded on the door to open up. That was when I saw the guy raise up a shotgun out of the long coat and storm into the room, and the two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting, and was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas," he said, and he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took all the boxes out my hand or slid a $5 into my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my own gun. I knew the guy, and both ladies saw me, and I know they know I saw the gun. I had to get out. No witnesses. I got into my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops, and gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a lift. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women, and the occupants of the room they went into said nothing happened, and that I was full of crap. Well, I know what I saw. Better to be safe than sorry. I'm an 18-year-old female, and have been working for a large department store in the UK for just over a year now. This story happened when I was 16. It was late evening, around 9 PM or so, and we stayed open late for the Christmas rush. I was walking across the shop floor when a man brushed very close to me. I'm often in my own world at work, and this made me jump a little. He must have noticed this because he said, "Hello?" I responded, and he asked me how I was. "Good, and you?" He nodded and walked towards the doors out into the car park. I didn't think much of this at all, but it did catch me off guard, and I decided to walk across to the other side of the shop. Bear in mind the floor plan is massive, and continue tidying up the rails there. I hear a man shout from a few meters away, and I look up to see the same guy again. It's only now I really took notice of his appearance. He had a large tattoo of a dagger on his right cheekbone and was wearing a black jumper with a hood pulled up. He was a foot taller than me and clearly much older. I asked him if he needed any help, and he gestured for me to approach him. I tend to freeze and follow instructions in this situation, which isn't exactly the best survival instinct. I naively thought he just wanted to know in which way the exit was. He asked me my name and I told him. "You've got really pretty eyes," he said. At this point I was getting quite freaked out. I thanked him hesitantly and turned to leave, but he put his hands on my forearm, and again I just kind of froze. "Have you got Snapchat? Can I get your number? You got a boyfriend?" He became more and more persistent, and I just wanted him to leave. I told him that 1, I'm working, and 2, I'm underage. He then asked me how old I was, and I told him I'm 16. Again, I don't know why I answered, but my brain just shuts down. To which he responded, "It could work." At this point, I was really shaken up and didn't quite know what to do. Thankfully, one of my male colleagues walked up to me to ask me a question, making him leave, winking at me as he left. Noticing my distress, he asked what happened, and I explained. He urged me to report it, but I was hesitant and didn't want to inconvenience anyone or get them in trouble. However, there are a lot of teenage girls that work in the shop, and I didn't want them to be targeted, so I told one of the managers. They notified the store security and sent me off the shop floor to get a coffee and calm down. I came back, finished my shift, and went to leave. The security guy stopped me on my way out and told me he didn't mean to alarm me, but they had managed to track down the man's car and he was parked inside it. They said there was a high probability he was waiting for me, and I shouldn't go there by myself, just as a precaution. He escorted me to my mum's car and we drove home. I'm so thankful that nothing ended up happening to me that night. I often think about what would have happened if my friend didn't persuade me to report it, and I had gone out alone. I stopped at a co-worker's house one night after a late shift to drop off something she had forgotten. I didn't know exactly where I was, but I was familiar with the town and knew the highway I had to take home was very close. So I turned on the GPS to get me back to the highway. Sometime after 3 AM, the GPS bugged out and started leading me in circles before finally spitting me out on some back-wooded road in the middle of nowhere. I drove around a bit until I saw a man just walking in circles next to the road. I'm a young woman with a small stature, and I've seen enough movies to urge me to keep driving, but I kept watching him in my rear view. When I looked back to the road, I had to slam on the brakes because in front of me was an albino deer just standing there. It looked up, then walked away, and I kept driving. I saw lights behind me, but at this point I was looking out for more deer or weird things and ignored them as they kept getting brighter and brighter. This guy's getting really close, I thought. So I looked up and there was nothing there, no cars in sight. This happened 2 more times and I still didn't know where I was, and I was about to call my boyfriend when I made a turn and came out right in the town I lived. When I got home, my boyfriend told me he heard the sound of our front door opening and someone coming inside twice while I was gone, but he checked the house and didn't find anyone. It was an odd night, and I don't think either of us have slept well. I've been to this girl's house twice after this incident, and both times my GPS has taken me right to the highway like normal. I wish I knew what it was about.
It was a blistering summer afternoon in the early 2000s, the kind where the heat shimmered off the pavement and the air smelt like sunscreen and salt. We were at the beach. It was packed. Colourful towels, dripping ice cream cones, and kids screaming. My 6-year-old cousin and me at 10 were on the shoreline, kneeling in wet sand, sculpting a sandcastle. The tide licked our feet, the water warm and familiar. Our parents sat a short distance away, sunbathing and chatting, trusting that we were safe as we were still in sight. Or at least that's what we thought. I don't remember seeing the couple walk up. 1 second it was just me and my cousin, and the next they were there. A man and young woman, maybe in their early 20s. They knelt down beside us. The man had shaggy brown hair, long jeans that would darken at the hems from seawater, and the woman had sunglasses so big I couldn't even see her eyes. But she smiled an awful lot. "Wow, what a cool sandcastle," the man said in a smooth voice. "Did you guys make this by yourselves?" My cousin nodded excitedly. I stared. Something about them made my stomach turn. Their clothes were mostly dry. Their skin wasn't sunburnt or sandy like everyone else's. They didn't have towels or beach bags or anything there that said they were here to swim. They weren't here for the beach. They were clearly there for some other reason. Then the woman crouched lower. "You guys are about the same age as our kids. A boy just like you, 10? And a little girl like you, 6. We hadn't told them our ages. A wave crashed beside us, and even though we were surrounded by hundreds of people, it felt like we were alone. "You should come with us." It wasn't a question. I went rigid. My cousin obviously just kept packing wet sand into a mold, but I knew I had to run. I swallowed hard and said, "I'll be right back." And then I turned and ran, until I reached my parents. When I told them what happened, my aunt's face changed, and she took off running towards the water where my cousin was. When she got there, the couple were gone, vanished. Just my cousin still playing by the castle, patting the walls in place, completely unaware of how close she had been to disappearing forever. I know I shouldn't have left her alone. I know I should have grabbed her hand and pulled her with me, but I was 10, and I thought she was still safe. I'm 32 now, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have agreed to go with them. Would we have ever been seen again, or even been here at all?
This experience happened about 4 or 5 years ago on a very hot summer night in a small town in the Midwest. My friend and I were hanging out one night really late when we decided we really could use some IHOP, mostly because it's the only 24-hour restaurant in town and it was around 4 a.m. So I drive us there. On the ride, we're being super goofy because I think we were a little too tired, and the idea of pancakes, you know. All mirth is drained as we pull into the parking lot and see a group of around 7 men approaching the IHOP on foot. Our windows were down because it was very hot and my car didn't have functioning air conditioning, so we furiously rolled them up and sat quietly to see what they were doing. I can't explain why we were so immediately scared. Probably just some drunk guys wanting pancakes, right? Either way, we wait to gauge the situation instead of leaving the car to go inside. The men are obviously plastered drunk. Another detail is that the IHOP is off the highway and quite far from all the residential areas and bars, so they'd have had to have walked quite a way away from the nearest bar to get there. Anyway, we are paralyzed just watching them, hoping they don't notice us in the car. When they do, they start shouting and walking towards us. We lock the doors. They're banging on the windows, shouting unintelligible drunken things. I turn the keys in the ignition and start driving off, but they run after us. They chase us on foot, screaming obscenities before we lose sight of them in the distance, after about a quarter mile. Seems bizarre to me. Obviously they weren't going to catch us, but they futilely ran after us for that long. I don't know, must have just been the alcohol, but it certainly scared the crap out of me. I think they must have been out-of-towners staying at the hotel, since there were several relatively close to the IHOP. That would make sense, more so than them walking all the way from town anyway. Luckily that means I should hopefully never have to run into them again. I have a story to share that takes place in a London hostel 5 years ago. There were 2 friends with me that were both male, and we were staying in a 9-bed mixed dorm. There were 3 sets of 3-tier bunk beds, and I was in the bottom bed of the right bunk. My first friend is on the top bunk, and my second friend is in the middle bunk. So we get in at 2 a.m, and all just quietly get into our beds. After a few minutes of lying there trying to sleep, I hear rustling behind me. I'm lying on my side facing the wall, so I think it's just someone going through their bag and I ignore it. Then I feel a hand on my hip over the cover, and I turned round and see it's a random guy telling me to move over and trying to pull up my cover. I initially thought he was drunk and wasn't sure which bed to be in, so I told him to go find his own bed, and then he shuffled away to the bottom bed of the left bunk. Then he comes back again. I tell him to go back to his own bed and he shuffles back to his own again. This happens another few times with me gradually speaking louder and getting less polite, telling him to piss off. I'm shaking because this situation is making me so nervous and message my mate that's on the top bunk, saying I don't think I'm going to be able to sleep that night. He messages back casually thinking it's the cause of someone snoring. This is when I find out both my mates have earplugs in, and although they've heard me speaking, they each thought I was speaking to the other friend. So I tell him the situation, and he starts keeping an eye out. I hear the guy go to the bathroom that's an ensuite, but I can tell from the light he's left the bathroom door open while doing so and refused to look. My mate fills me in that the guy was walking around with his pants down and deliberately left the door open to get me to look. But either way, the guy goes back to his bed after, and we think the situation is finally over. Then it happens again. My mate keeps an eye out, shines his phone light on the floor, and shouts for the guy to go away. Apparently he was crawling across the floor towards me. The guy suddenly takes offense at my mate's light shining on him and starts actually climbing the bunk ladder like King Kong to get on my mate, and was trying to take his phone. They wrestle for a while, with my mate actually kicking the guy in the neck to try to keep him away, only for the guy to swing backwards and come straight back at him again. I use this time to run for security, who find the guy still hanging on the bed when they get there, and they call for the police and have the guy taken away in a riot van and is banned from the building. While the police had dragged him outside waiting for the riot van, the guy even headbutted the brick wall several times. No idea what the guy was on, because it wasn't alcohol, but definitely something to take a kick to the neck, and still act like nothing happened after. The guy kept trying to blame my mate when security came as well, saying things in broken English like, "Come up here and see how violent the guy is." My other mate had slept through the whole incident, kept saying that the next day he couldn't believe how friendly everyone in London was. Please don't let this put you off hostels though. I've travelled in them alone around Europe and never had any problems before. They're usually a great way to meet people or find activities to do in the local area. It was just a one-off creep. Recently, I was having some trouble with kids knocking on the door and running. I also have severe PTSD, so that was causing me some issues at home. I was in contact with a police officer in the area whom my mother knew. We met up at a small coffee shop to discuss what I could do to make myself feel safer. This was going fine until my mother brought up an old story about when our house was broken into. My memory is this: waking up on Christmas and only having one thing because everything else was taken. I was too young to really remember it, but I'm 35 and not one person has spoken to me about it since childhood, so I always thought my version was correct. Except, it really wasn't. What actually happened was my mother was woken up in the night having heard a noise. She knew there were burglaries in the area because my uncle next door had his Christmas presents stolen. She got up in the dark and went next door to my room to pick me up. I was around 2 years old and wide awake, just standing in my cot wide-eyed. My mother flicked on the lights and I said something about a man. She was freaking out. We were alone in the house, and when she looked down she saw little patches of burnt carpet and spent matches. They'd come in through the downstairs, lit matches and just dropped them while still lit, while they were walking around. She could follow the entire trail from the back of the house to my room. Back to the present. I'm staring at my mother in the coffee shop, cup of coffee halfway to my face, and she's like, "What?" I told her I didn't recall this, I recalled something else, and told her quickly, and she was like, "Oh, that was not Uncle. We nearly died in a house fire." And I had an existential crisis right there because I had been deathly afraid of fires all my life, to the point of getting night terrors as a little kid with no explanation, and only now could I understand why. This happened in the summer, around 2016. My twin sister and I grew up in a small, sleepy village in northeast Nebraska called Bow Valley. The population is less than 200 people, and there was only one store open at any given time. We moved back home after college for a little while until we could figure out a plan for our futures. One night at around 2 or 3 in the morning, we were both still awake and having a high amount of anxiety. This was nothing new, as we've had anxiety since we were young. We decided to go for a walk, to try to relieve that constant ache in our chests. Because Bow Valley was so small, everyone knew everyone, and it was a relatively safe place. We had gone for walks at this time before without any incident. We would walk along the main road, which is about a half mile, and connect to the highway. The route is only partially lit by streetlights on each end, the lights of the town, and one singular light at the end of the road, by the highway. My sister and I talked while we walked. We would speak about whatever was in our minds, usually what was bothering us at that moment, and that's what we did. Because of the conversation, the first half of the walk went by really fast. We left the streetlights of the village behind as we walked that half mile to the highway. We were feeling so good at that point from the exercise that we contemplated going even further onto a minimum maintenance road that was on the opposite side of the highway. "You want to keep going?" I asked my sister. "Sure," she replied. We began walking across towards the road. There were no lights on this road, and admittedly, I am a bit scared of the dark. All the same, I was determined to keep going. But as we proceeded, that really good feeling started to go away and was slowly replaced by the feeling of being watched. I found myself looking around into the fields, and dread filled my body. I don't want to go any further. I don't like the way this feels," I said. My sister did not argue. I don't know if it was because she was feeling it too, or because we often respected each other's intuition. Either way, I was happy to turn around and get out of there. We walked back across the highway and onto the main road back into Bow Valley. The streetlight was making me feel safer somehow, and I tried to shrug off that feeling. Then, as we neared closer to the town, we saw something out of the ordinary. We noticed a tall silhouette of a stranger walking on the opposite side of the road towards us. I thought perhaps my eyes were playing tricks on me. I thought maybe it was the streetlights lined up in a particular way. Neither of us had bought a phone or flashlight. "Did you see that?" my sister asked. "Yeah." I felt my heart drop. "Maybe it's a neighbor. It's weird for someone to be out this late, though. It's weird for us to be out this late," she replied. While she had me there, trying to identify the approaching figure, we concentrated our gaze. The longer we observed, the more things seemed off. The figure was walking away from town, so the streetlights behind it framed its silhouette and movement. The first thing we noticed is that the figure was wearing a coat, which was odd because it was the middle of summer. That's when we began to realize the body language was unorthodox. The motion of the stranger mimicked walking, but not like how you or I do it. It was almost comparable to the movement of arms and legs of a marionette doll. Even more unnerving, this spindly, tall figure was walking swiftly and with purpose. My sister and I both felt uneasy. I had a lighter in my pocket that I placed in my fist, preparing myself in case I needed to punch whatever this thing was. My sister had a pocket knife that she got out and was ready. As we were contemplating our next move, I noticed a car driving on the highway. I sensed it was going to turn our way. "Let's wait and see if that car comes this way," I said. "The light will illuminate whoever that is." Meanwhile, we have slowed to a stop, but the thing was still moving closer and closer. It would only be a short matter of time before it reached us, and luckily for us it did. The car did end up turning onto our road, and so we stayed back and watched what happened. The car neared us, and the lights finally hit the figure. At that moment our blood ran cold, as we both watched this thing fly into the nearby darkness of the field the second the headlights were near. It flew so fast, it was like a tissue tied to a string being yanked in the opposite direction. I remember the silhouette tails of the coat flapping behind it. I remember that the light did not illuminate any part of it, and it remained a dark mass. We looked at each other absolutely horrified, and booked it back to the streetlights of the village and back to the house. I couldn't help but feel that we would have been in danger had it not been for that car. That was the only car we saw that night. And I wondered if the car was the doing of our ancestors, or maybe just a coincidence, or perhaps we were being protected. Either way, this experience has opened our minds, and we have not walked that stretch of road at night again. This happened a few years ago. My aunt and uncle own a restaurant, and one Saturday they were moving from their old location to a new one. My aunt, uncle, and boyfriend at the time but soon-to-be husband, and their cousin, and about 10 other people, mostly employees, were helping in the move since there was a bunch of large equipment. We were all at the old restaurant packing things, tying them down, when we ran out of ratchet straps. I offered to drive to my parents' house about 30 minutes away to get more from my dad. Because everyone else was busy, I went alone. On the way back, I got a call from my aunt saying that they were all going to take a load to the new location and to just meet them there. Since I didn't know how to get to the new place, I pulled over into a parking lot and put in the address. From the road, you weren't able to see the parking lot at all because of the trees. The only odd thing that I didn't notice at the time was on this sunny weekend day there were no other cars there. I pulled into a spot and immediately grabbed my phone to put in the address. For whatever reason, I didn't put it in park like I normally do, which unlocks the doors. Less than a minute after, I looked down and heard what felt like a huge hit to the car. I remember looking at him for so long because I thought it was odd how I couldn't see the color of his eyes because of how big his pupils were. It's important to note that I was in a small SUV, and he had to bend over to look in the window. A second later, he was pulling on the door handle so hard, I thought he was going to rip it off. I was also confused why the door wasn't unlocked like it normally would be when I'm in a parking spot. He got visibly upset that the door wasn't opening, so he began banging on the side with his fist against the window, swinging his whole arm over and over. Getting progressively more pissed, he moved to the door handle of the back seat, and at this point I was so scared of him getting in the car, I grabbed and unsheathed the camping knife I had in my door. When I looked back at him, he stopped attacking the car, saw the knife and smiled. I think it was right then that I realized he didn't want money. He didn't want to abuse me. He wanted to kill me. I knew that if he had gotten into the car, it would have been over for me, even with the knife. He was way bigger than me and he was hitting the car so hard, I was amazed the windows held. I guess I got comfortable with him not being able to get the doors open, but after bashing the back window a few more times and the car rocking back and forth, the panic got worse, because I knew the doors weren't opening for some reason, but maybe the trunk would. Since it was an SUV, if he got into the trunk, he could just climb over the back seats to get to me. He hit against the back windows with both of his balled up fists and was yelling something I couldn't understand. Right there and then, I realized that I could slam it in reverse. I dropped the knife to my lap, hit the gear shift into R, grabbed the wheel and put my foot down. I have no idea if I hit him or if he jumped out the way because I didn't look back. I put it into drive and peeled out the parking lot. It was my first time ever ignoring a stop sign. I still have no idea why I didn't put it in park, but I'm grateful every day that I didn't. My uncle just got married in his 40s. It was his first marriage, and for their honeymoon, he, his wife, and her daughter, who's a special needs child and awesome, went to stay in a cabin on Big Bear Mountain in Southern California. They rented the cabin, unpacked all of their things, and settled in it for a 3-day stay. On the last night, my uncle was up watching TV very late. His wife and stepdaughter had gone to bed, and he had to use the restroom. So he gets up, goes to the restroom, does his business, and exits it. The only light on in the whole cabin is that in front of the TV in the living room, but it was bright enough to light up the whole living room and part of the hallway too. As he opened the door to the restroom, he saw his wife walk towards the kitchen. He figured she'd gotten up and was hungry, so he was going to go speak with her. He followed after her, and when she reached the end of the hallway, she turned slightly in the direction of the kitchen, and then, at warp speed, ran into it, faster than a human could move. This figure was wearing a long flowing white gown, similar to the one that his wife had worn to bed, and slightly longer than shoulder-length hair. Kinda wigged out, he took a few steps back and peeked into the room, where his wife and stepdaughter were asleep, and found both of them in bed. Needless to say, he couldn't sleep after that, and they left the next morning. He called up the guy that he had rented the cabin from and said, "Hey, you didn't tell me the cabin was haunted." The guy casually replied, "Oh, you saw her." Her, thought my uncle. He'd never specified what he'd seen, proving that he already knew a whacked-out speedster she-ghost was haunting the cabin. This happened 8 years ago, when I was just a little more naive and 30 pounds lighter. Still just as short though. It was a week before Christmas and I was finishing up all my shopping. My mother, aunt, nana are all big lottery people, so I tend to get them scratch tickets and season tickets as gifts. I don't gamble really, so it's my only time buying them in a year. I always go to the same place down the street from me, and I wouldn't say I live anywhere dangerous. Not gated community level, but like a solid children can walk around alone in dusk 9 times out of 10. I now had an old Saab that was the classic no one can drive her but me level of finicky. Sometimes she just wouldn't start unless you held the brake and shifted through the gears. I went to park, pushed really hard and turned the key. It took forever to figure out that special secret handshake. The roof needed to be put manually back, like if it fell on your head, if you put it down, and just a lot of wonky stuff. My brother, who is a lunatic with toxic rage issues, but that's a different story, had broken the handle on my passenger side door right before this after picking him up from scaring children at the hospital. So you wouldn't open that door at all anymore. To get to the passenger side, you were either Dukes of Hazzarding or going through my side. So it's Christmassy. A bit of snow and sludge, but pretty normal for any day. I head to the gas station, get the tickets, cash only, so enough money to make my purchase in hand. There are a few people behind me in line, and a few playing Keno in the sitting area. There's one wiry guy behind me to the side in line, but I don't notice much other than he was a little closer than I personally would have liked. I make my purchases, several $20 scratch tickets. They don't want anything less, bad odds apparently. A couple year-long season tickets adding up to just over $400. Ouch. I pay the cashier and head out to my janky little Saab. Sit down, close my door, don't lock it, and begin to count and organize my change and everything. Not 35 seconds later, the wiry man comes out and walks by my car. As he does, he stalls just for a second and tries my passenger side handle. It doesn't work, and just makes a clunk, as the handle is short of free moving and doesn't connect to any mechanical stuff at this point. My heart dropped, and stomach felt sour. My body knew to panic, but my head hadn't caught up. He immediately keeps going, walks out the parking lot and down the sidewalk. Until I thought about it later and told some people, I didn't even consider the man was probably going to try and rob me, or worse. I'm now very religious, follow the 45-second rule, and I'm a lot more vigilant Christmas shopping. And of course, no one ever won on any of those tickets that I risked my life for.
This was when I was 18. I'm 27 now, so it was quite a while ago, when I was still in college. One day, a group of friends and I decided we were going to check out a road in Metamora, Michigan, that was supposedly haunted. I have always been fascinated by the paranormal, and was obviously super down to go. My friend Emily, on the other hand, was not so keen. While she enjoyed some things that were spooky, she wasn't particularly excited about the idea, since the road does have a bit of a dark history behind it. For a bit of context, in the small town of Metamora, Michigan, lies a 2-mile dirt path, aptly named Blood Road. The legend of how the road got its ever so appropriate nickname is because of the legend that a man had taken the life of his wife and dumped her body in the swamps along the path. It is said that the dirt of the road or mortars of the swamp are known to turn red because of the murder. Another legend states that back in the 1600s, there were cultists who practiced Satanism and witchcraft, and they fled into the swampy area due to the abundance of witch hunts and trials that went on during that time. It is said that they were able to practice their rituals and sacrifices here, and spilled blood that stains the dirt road to this day. For a more scientific approach on why the dirt is colored that way, it's because of the red clay mixed in with the dirt. In more recent times, there have been sightings of people performing questionable seances and rituals in the swamps, and even alleged meetings of KKK members. But back to the story. My other friends, Claire and Harriet, were just as interested in going to see Blood Road as I. With a little bit of peer pressure and a promise not to leave the vehicle, Emily finally gave in and decided why not. Of course, if you're going to go to an alleged haunted road, you have to go at night, and that is exactly what we did. We all met up at Claire's house and decided to carpool to Emily's house since she lived on a dirt road anyway and was used to driving down them.
Making the 20 to 30 minute trek to Blood Road was pleasant. Harriet and I joked about each seeing something and maybe even catching it on our cell phones, while Claire was talking to Emily about other things, but she was still visibly uneasy. The entire car went quiet as soon as we reached our destination, and the sun had gone down significantly. No more jokes were to be had, nor idle chatter, as I pulled into the 2-mile stretch of muddy road. In the daytime, it isn't as intimidating, since the greenery of the plants and trees lessen the creepiness. However, we were nearing almost total darkness, with only the car's headlights as the source of light. Emily slows to a stop and makes sure we remember our promise to stay in the car. She lowers the windows, and for the first minute or so, all we hear is the typical swamp life. It got eerily quiet all of a sudden, and everyone in the car was hyper-aware of a strange muffled speech in the distance. The 4 of us peered out the window to hear a little better, and as soon as we did that, we recognized the sound to be chanting. None of us could tell exactly what was being chanted, but it did not sound like anything any of us could understand. Emily decided she'd had enough and rolled the window up, and honestly, I couldn't blame her, as we were all unnerved. Nothing really happened to us, except for the fact that we were all spooked by the chanting that we had heard. The drive back was quiet, and none of us wanted to speak as the darkness of the night sky and looming trees swallowed everything while still on Blood Road. I guess Harriet and I got what we wanted, but I'd like to go back again to see what else can be discovered. My friend Jane also had a story to share on Blood Road. Back when Jane was in high school, she and her 2 older sisters and a friend of hers heard about an abandoned house on Blood Road and wished to go explore it. Like myself, Jane is also heavily interested in the paranormal. However, she is a little sensitive to sensing spirits and the like. On a mild winter's night, Jane and her sisters and friend drove down Blood Road and parked on the side near the tree line of the woods. There was nothing spectacular or disturbing about the abandoned houses that they had heard about. It was just old and spooky. They trekked about 10 minutes into the forest before reaching their decrepit destination. The closer they got to the house, the more uneasy Jane became. Eventually it got so bad that she refused to go into the house altogether, as something was telling her not to go in. Jane's sisters and friend still wanted to explore the area, but agreed to take her back to the car as she was clearly disturbed. On the way back to the car, the group came across a small clearing, and as Jane looked up from the ground, she saw a black, humanoid figure around 6 foot tall walking among the trees and vanishing. She was frozen in terror, and a strong sense of dread washed over her. For at least a minute, Jane could neither speak nor move, as she was frightened by what she had seen, and she recalls her sister telling her when she went to grab her by the hand. It was ice cold, and that her face had drained of all color as she stopped walking. Jane's sisters and friends had to force her to move, as she was too scared to do so, but eventually got back to the car. As soon as Jane was in the car, the sense of fear gradually went away, as she wasn't in the vicinity of the house. Her sisters and friend went back to the house to continue to explore. There was the typical graffiti on the walls, some of it occult in nature, and there was evidence of a possible ritual with burnt candles and a few old books. However, they only explored one room due to the sudden feeling of unease and nausea that overcame them the longer they stayed. Fortunately, nothing happened to the 3 that went back to explore, and they had to call it quits once the nausea and unwelcome feelings became too much. It's been years since this has happened, and nothing ever came of it. But like myself, Jane is willing to go back and see what else can be found on Blood Road. It's the mid-90s in rural Ohio. Children are free range, smartphones are non-existent, and I'm a quiet, shy 4th grader. That summer, my mum became good friends with a couple who owned a large, beautiful flower farm. Most weekends they would host friends and family for bonfires and s'mores. The adults would drink grown-up beverages, and the kids would explore and play. On this particular evening in the encounter, we had just settled in beside the fire when my mum stiffened beside me. She turned and said to me, "I don't want you and your brother just wandering off. Just play here where I can see you." Now this was unusual and kind of a bummer to my kid self, but she was regularly so lenient that I begrudgingly went along with it. After our s'mores were eaten and before the sugar rush ensued, my mum gathered us together to wash our hands. Once again, this seemed odd, as I was completely capable of using the restroom on my own, as was my younger brother. As we were rounding the corner to the house, we passed a man we had not previously met. My mother grabs both our hands tightly and speed walks us back to the back door, closing the screen door and locking it behind her. In my memory, she was composed, but she later told me she felt breathless and panicked, like a wild-eyed animal. Not long after, we hit the road to get home for bed and church next morning. I remember thinking I wish we could stay and play longer, or even camp there overnight like we did sometimes, but oh well, my child mind did not connect anything odd about the whole situation. It would be many years later, when I was an adult, that my mother would tell me a story I will never forget. She remembers all the same details: the bonfire, the s'mores, the sugared-up kiddos, and the sticky marshmallow hands. But she also clearly remembers the sudden feeling of inescapable dread in the pit of her stomach, and the hackles rising on the back of her neck. Even in front of the bonfire, her blood ran icy cold. She told me all she could think of was, "It's time to go. We need to get out of there." She said it was the most persistent feeling of urgency she's ever felt. She told me that the next day at church, she asked her friend who the new man was who was at their home last night. He replied, "That's my brother. He just got released from prison for child molestation and assault. He and I have never gotten along, but he has nowhere else to go. I asked him to go somewhere else for the evening, but he just showed up back at the house with no warning. I would have never allowed him near children." Her jaw almost dropped to the floor. She told me that before she had ever even seen him on the way back to the house, she could feel his presence. She kept looking into the darkness beside the house and feeling like she was being watched. Instinctively, she knew her children were in harm's way and needed to get them elsewhere. She didn't question it or blow it off. She listened to her gut, which I'm thankful she did. The feelings she experienced that night were so intense, we never went back to their home again. Friends, please, always listen to your gut and stay safe out there. I stayed in a B&B in Pennsylvania that seemed cute enough. They did have a wall of antique dolls in the main room, but otherwise showed no signs of weirdness. That's until we settled into the room. I noticed some scratches on the floor near a bookcase, and after some inspection, realized it was a secret door. When I asked the owner, who gave a creepy vibe, if it worked, he said yes, and showed me that it opened to their office, which was a cluttered room with a computer and piles of crap. It had a lock on their side, and when I asked if there was a lock on my side, he smiled and simply said, "No." When I showed some concern that there was an unlockable entrance to my room that was camouflaged that they didn't tell me about, he just kept smiling. That night I was terrified and barricaded the door and barely slept. When I was 13, I was visiting my grandparents' farm during the summer in rural America. To kill time, I would spend the afternoon fishing alone on a riverbank about 3 miles away and would ATV there. This location happened to also be near a seldom used campsite. Where I fished, there was a long, steep boat ramp and a dock about 150 feet long, sloping down to the water, surrounded by steep, eroded banks with tall weeds and grass, making anyone below the top of the boat ramp invisible to the campers. While I was fishing, a car drove over the top of the boat ramp and parked below me. A guy in his 60s got out and walked over to me. He asked me about what I was fishing for, what I was using as bait, and where I lived. I don't remember all of the conversation, but I started getting creeped out when he eventually offered bait he hadn't used in his car. I declined. After a bit, he said he was a part-time photographer for a fishing magazine and wanted to take my picture for it. Although I was creeped out, I obliged just to see if he would leave soon. He snapped a few pictures of me with my pole and a fish I had caught. After what felt like too long, he began to leave, but then he asked for my address so that he could send the magazine with my pictures in it. Feeling really weirded out, I gave him a fake address with my house number and road name changed. Looking back, I think I might have been in considerable danger. What do you think? Overreaction? Or something more sinister? 4 years ago, after just getting my degree, I decided it was time to leave my hometown and pursue my career. So I moved to a big city that was 9 hours away from my parents and most of my family. I had no friends there for months, and my starting salary was low because I came into this company as a trainee. I was very demotivated and missed my family a lot. At one point, I decided to go visit the relatives who lived by the coast, which was a 5-hour drive away by car. I didn't have a car, and the buses were expensive. But my cousin told me about this Facebook group for rides between my city and another that was close to their town. I went there and found myself a ride with some university students who were just a few years younger than I was. And the day for the trip came. I met them, and in total it was 5 of us in a wide sedan. A lady who was studying medicine, the owner of the car, her boyfriend, the driver, a sophomore girl who was friends with them, and a random young guy who found their ad on Facebook called Mark. It was a Friday, and people from this whole region were infamous for drinking extremely often. So, inspired by the warning my cousin gave me, I awkwardly asked them, "Sorry to ask, but none of you have drunk recently or plan to on our trip, right?" The driver assured me that he was fully sober and that he wouldn't have any, even if the passengers did. After hearing that, his girlfriend and the other girl assured that they wouldn't be drinking because their parents were very strict and would not let them misbehave. Mark giggled when hearing that and whispered to me, "Women in their town are infamous for drinking a lot more and denying it." The trip went on, and we went around dozens of mountains. We had a few conversations about university and work, but most of the trip was listening to a popular singer from the 90s. After around 2 hours and a half, the driver stopped the car at a gas station, and he needed the toilet. Mark decided to go with him, as he wanted to get something from the store. A few minutes later, I see Mark and our driver coming back to the car, each holding a 6-pack of cerveza. Well, actually, the driver was carrying 2 of those. I almost freaked out, but kept my composure and asked them if they were going to drink now. The driver said, "I won't until I'm done driving, but let the others and yourself take 1 or 2 if they want." Almost 2 hours later, we had left the mountains and arrived to flat land. The sign said that we were 1 kilometer away from the city. Suddenly, the car took a right turn, leaving the main road and heading towards the suburbs. The place looked desolated, and most of the houses seemed empty. I thought it was a bit weird, but didn't ask anything because I assumed that maybe we were dropping the other girl off, as they probably already knew where she lived. The dude then just parked the car on the yard of an abandoned house and said, "We're basically home. You guys down for some drinks?" Mark was totally down for it, but the girls kept saying stuff like, "I'm not sure, I don't usually drink." "Oh, okay, we'll make an exception, only because it was a tough midterm." I refused and said, "But how are we going to get to the city? You guys agreed to take me to the bus station." They all said it was very close, and that worst case scenario I could just walk there. I was more worried because I planned to take the local bus at a certain hour to then get to my cousin's house, which was still an hour from there. They started drinking really fast, and the girls got to a point where they were trying to pee doing a handstand against the wall. I was desperate to leave, but I didn't feel safe walking to the city because it was really dark out there, and this region had a bad reputation for crime. Outsiders were specifically more at risk. There was no phone service either, so I had to wait for these guys and see what they could offer me. They finally decided it was time to go home. I said if it wasn't okay for any of them to drive, because they were all plastered, I offered to do it for them. However, the driver said, "It's not up to me. Car belongs to my girlfriend." However, his girlfriend refused, saying she didn't even know me, and her dad wouldn't be okay with a stranger driving her car. I said I understood that, but they had to honor the arrangement. After a bit, the driver finally got off from the driver's seat. I assumed they would let me drive, as I was sitting in the middle of the back seat, so I asked the guys next to me to let me off the car. The sophomore girl, who was to my left, did, but before I could stop her, she climbed into the driver's seat. The girl started saying, "Come on, Abby, let me drive. It's close and there's no one outside no more." "Alright, sure, but go slow." The previous driver got into the back seat with me, and I was still confined to the middle seat. I was getting upset, and I wanted to stop her, but I didn't know how, because everyone seemed okay with this. My panic worsened when the sophomore girl started asking how to turn the car on and operate it. "You don't know how to drive?" I asked. "Nah, I don't. My parents haven't let me drive. It's my first time." "Get down then, please. I have a license. I can get you home safely." Then the car's owner told me I couldn't decide over her car and said that it would be okay, that there was almost no one out driving at this hour, and that they could help her friend learn to drive. I asked them to let me get out the car, but they wouldn't let me. They swore it was a very short drive and that we would go slowly and all be okay. The girl really had no idea how to drive. Unfortunately, this was an automatic transition. Had it been a manual one, she probably wouldn't been able to even move it. And the car moved, but in the ways you would expect it to move for a driver who had never stepped on pedals of an actual car. She would hit the brake and steer the wheel too hard, drove into the middle of the road and kept freaking out while the others yelled instructions to her, while I pleaded with them to let me out of this moving death trap. Fortunately, the streets were empty, but I couldn't help fear that if a car came, we would surely crash into it, as there was no way she would be able to manage moving the car out of the way in time. But eventually, we made it to the street where the bus station was, and as soon as they pointed that out, I asked them to just stop the car and let me walk there, but they didn't. They forced me to be dropped off at the front. If I were in this situation again, I don't even know how I would get out of it. And I have never taken another ride in that way since. Be careful who's driving you. Nearly 2 years ago now, on Christmas, I was at my dad's with some of my siblings. We celebrated Christmas, and then after dinner, my dad headed off to be with his girlfriend at her apartment. Left in the house were my 16-year-old uncle, my 16-year-old brother, me who was 15, and the youngest who was a toddler. I woke up early the next morning, the day after Christmas, and sat on the floor beside an outlet on my tablet. Everyone else was still sleeping, and then I heard banging on the back door. I thought it was my dad returning, but the banging got louder and went on for way too long. For lack of a better term, I disassociated. I didn't know what to do and couldn't move until I heard the back door break. I had been paranoid about home invasions in our area, but I had no idea what to do and just stood there shocked. I put down my tablet and picked up a nearby flashlight, probably to use as a projectile to whoever broke in. When the back door had given out, I heard him quickly go through the downstairs, stomp up the stairs, and then he was right outside the door of the room I was in. The man opened the door, turned left and then right, where he saw me sitting on the floor beside the outlet less than 3 feet from him. He was taller than my dad and wore a completely black ski mask. He held a big, rustish crowbar that had a blue handle, and he was wide and on the older side. I took a small breath and screamed louder than I ever have, and held it for at least 20 seconds. Once I screamed, he screamed a bit too, then ran downstairs and left the house. I went to the top of the staircase after he was already down them and out the hallway and yelled, "Please leave," as loudly as I could. Looking back, asking a home invader to leave is useless because he was already leaving, but we'd already been broken into. But I wasn't thinking at my best. My screaming woke up my uncle and my older brother. I wasn't wearing pants, so I put pants on quicker than I ever have, and while telling my older brother what happened, as he was half awake and confused, I ran downstairs and my uncle had just come in from his room from the basement. I told him someone had broken in and left after I screamed. He already had a knife and told me to grab one too. And did, and after checking quickly on the toddler, who was somehow still sleeping. My uncle told me to guard the back door and stab anyone who came through while he checked the area outside the neighborhood to see if the robber had gone. I held the knife and stood beside the broken back door, knowing if someone had come back I couldn't do anything, as I have never fought, and I'm a child holding a kitchen knife. So I just held the knife in hopes they wouldn't come back, and they didn't. My uncle came back and said they must have had a driver, since no way could he get away that fast on foot. None of us had phones, so my older brother called my dad over Instagram on a tablet to tell him what happened. We explained, and Dad was 10 minutes away via car, and he hung up. While we sat there and waited for my dad, we spoke and realized it was likely all planned. The invader came in when there were no cars in the driveway, and after entering he ran directly upstairs, ignoring the new Christmas presents, an alcohol collection, and even 2 gaming consoles smack dab in the middle of the living room that he ran through. He went directly to my dad's room, where me and my older brother were. My dad collects valuable shoes and has some expensive watches he keeps in his closet, and only someone who's friends with my dad, who'd have been in the house before, could have done it, and knew exactly where to go. When my dad came back, he asked me over and over about how the intruder looked, and I told him again and again while he and my uncle tried to think which friend it could have been. I was the one who saw the guy, and he had been less than 3 feet away from me. I was in direct physical danger from some stranger I'd never met. We didn't call the cops, as the police in our area were known for being more than unhelpful. As Christmas was getting closer, I was worried about being back there around the same time the person broke in. I've had a harder time sleeping, and I've become more paranoid. I understand I was very, very lucky I wasn't hurt, and all I got was a broken back door. But I'm still honestly furious with the person who broke in. I hope whoever he is, no one likes him. He seriously has scarred me, maybe, for life. We haven't figured out who he is yet. But if I ever recognize him, I'd be sure to let my dad know that he's friends with a traitorous scumbag thief. When I was 14, I worked at a McDonald's that was connected to a gas station. It was a truck stop, so it was very busy 90% of the time. The only downside to working at a truck stop fast food place was that the bathroom was on the complete other side of the building. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and I was pretty small. Maybe not in height, but in size. I was around 5'6" and anywhere between 130 to 150 pounds. Not super tiny, but small enough where I probably would have made an easy target. This wasn't a fear of mine, but perhaps it should have been. I remember I was in gym class and it was the middle of the day. and it was one of those days where you could just sit on the side and catch up with work for other classes if we didn't want to participate in the game. My friends and I did this almost every time and almost never actually worked on anything important. We were laughing and joking around until I received Power School notifications on my school's iPad excusing me from the remaining classes of the day. I was really confused, considering my mum hadn't mentioned anything about picking me up early, and I was only seeing my dad every other weekend, and he wasn't the type to pick me up from school. I was grounded, so I didn't have a phone with me, other than a cheap flip phone my mum had gotten me from Walmart, so I messaged her about the notification, but before I got a response back from her, my gym teacher told me I needed to grab my things and go to the office, because my mum would be picking me up. This confused me even more, and I shot my mum another text asking her if she was picking me up from school. She freaked out and told me not to leave the building. At this point, I'm sitting in the office by the window, waiting for apparently nobody to come pick me up, until the situation was figured out. My mum ended up calling the school and letting them know that I wasn't allowed to leave with anyone that day. Apparently, whoever called claimed to be my mum and said that they were coming to collect me. As far as I know, nobody ever showed up to pick me up, and I didn't hear anything else about it. My mum wasn't very comfortable with me working at the truck stop, and we got my location switched to one that was closer in town and wasn't connected to a gas station. What we think might have happened is someone saw my name tag and possibly called all the schools in the area until they found me. But I still have no idea how they figured out my last name. With that being said, to the creepy stranger who pretended to be my mum over the phone and tried to pull me out of school to do who knows what, let's not meet. I was visiting New York City with my wife and 1-year-old. My brother had made the hotel reservation for us, and we thought it would be nice. We arrived and checked in, and then found our way to our room. The halls were a maze, and it took us a few minutes to find our room. It was pretty sketchy, but it was late and we were tired, so we began to settle in. My wife had brought some milk for our kid, and since the room didn't have a fridge, she asked me to take it to the front desk and ask them if they had a fridge we could use. I took the milk and headed into the maze of hallways, and I got a bit turned around but eventually found the elevator. I got in, hit the L button, and rode it down. When the door opened at the lobby, I was met with a dark, narrow hallway. I stupidly stepped out, confused as to what was going on. There were several doors on both sides of the hallway, but all were locked. I walked down the hallway and eventually started to hear music playing. After a few minutes, I turned a corner and almost ran into 2 big guys. I stopped and stared at them, wondering what the hell was going on. One of the two, after looking up and down at me, paused on the milk I was carrying and asked, "What are you doing here?" I stared for a few seconds and just said, "I'm trying to find the lobby." He then escorted me to the entrance of what turned out to be a strip club. After exiting, I saw the hotel about half a block up the street. Apparently, I took the elevator that the strippers would take with paying clients, and I had no idea. I thought I got lost in the Twilight Zone for a few minutes. I live in Mexico City, but for this story I was in Brazil, Vinhedo. The reason we were there was because my father used to work for an international delivery service and often had to leave the country for work. In this situation, he had to leave for Vinhedo, but he was to stay there for 3 years, so my parents decided on all of us moving there for those 3 years, mainly because my mother is Brazilian, and they wanted us to get in touch with our Brazilian roots. My first encounter with this strange man was in November, a few months after moving there. My mum was driving my sister and I to school. It was a small town where we lived, around 1,000 people living in the area, and despite that, I remember clearly that day having some of the worst traffic I'd ever seen. It was at that moment my sister, who must have been around 13, noticed a man dressed as Santa Claus near a pharmacy. My mum and I also looked at the man, but didn't think anything was wrong with it. We were in mid-November, Christmas sales were starting, and there were already some people dressed as Santa Claus that we had noticed in stores. But after a few minutes of waiting for a red light that never seemed to turn green, my sister and I noticed that the man wasn't walking or entering a store, but just staring at the cars. I don't remember anything after that. The second time we saw the strange man was in February, around a week after my birthday. My mum had picked us up from school, and we were going up a hill towards our house. That's when I noticed the man, but now I was perplexed, because it was February, and he still had a Santa Claus suit on. I remember clearly his face because he was staring at our car, and even though we started driving away, his body followed the direction of the vehicle. It was at that time I started having nightmares. I slept in my sister's room, even though I had my own bedroom at the time. I was so scared that for a year I stayed with her. My house was inside a condominium on the side of the hill. There were only 3 streets back to back, and on the last street there was a fence with a forest expanding from the top of the last street all the way to the bottom of the hill. My house was at the bottom of the street, overlooking the forest, and worst of all, it was facing a door on the fence that opened up to the forest. I had these nightmares, that a killer would exit the woods, see our house, break in, and end up taking everyone's life while making me watch. I think these nightmares influenced my thoughts when I saw the strange man for the third and final time. It must have been around July or August, because I knew we were on vacation. It was nighttime, and my family and I were having dinner and playing a board game. That's when we heard a knock on our door frantically. My dad stood up and went to the door, opened it, and saw it was our neighbor who looked really scared. She was with her son Pedro, and asked if we could take her son for a few minutes. My parents, of course, agreed, and my dad decided to accompany her to her house, to help her out on whatever happened. I sat with Pedro, pressuring him for details. He told me her mum had picked her up from a friend's house and that they went to their house. But before opening their front door, her mum saw a window open, and from the inside she could hear some footsteps. Her husband stayed at home while she went out, but he was a firefighter and had been called in because a fire had started somewhere, so he left shortly after. And that's what he informed him of, so she called the security guard, and that's when she decided to bring him to us. Then Pedro decided to share this story with me. I'm sure it was fake, and his objective was just to frighten me, and it worked. He said that a few years back an escaped prisoner had gone into the woods in front of the condominium and managed to break the lock in the gate. Then he broke into a house, the one we were currently occupying, and ended the life of the entire family. That, combined with what was happening at my neighbor's house and my nightmares, didn't help. After about an hour, I decided to leave to seek comfort from my dad. He wasn't happy that I left without telling anyone, especially if there was a possible home intruder next door. I was there when the security guard called the cops, opened the door and searched the house. In the end, it was a false alarm. The window was open because Pedro's dad forgot to close it when he left, and the footsteps were actually the sounds of water dripping from a tap onto the floor. We were all relieved, but when I looked at the wall separating my house from my neighbor's, I made a chilling realization. The man dressed like Santa Claus had jumped from my neighbor's backyard to ours. The fence was high, but there was a certain area you could climb easily to the other house. But again, considering the nightmares and the situation that had happened that day, I'm not sure if it really happened or was a figment of my imagination. After that, I don't really remember what happened. I never saw the man dressed as Santa again, but even today, I asked my mum if she remembered that man, and she would confirm his existence. After all that happened, I'm slightly sure the man was either a stalker or just crazy. But either way, I hope to never encounter him again. After surviving a brutal 5-day work marathon with just a measly 10 hours of sleep, I jetted off abroad, exhaustion weighing heavily on me as I arrived to the motel, a dilapidated building with dark carpets and blankets. I was tired and barely registered the subpar conditions. With sleep claiming me almost immediately, I drifted off at around 8 p.m. local time. The shrill ring of the motel phone pierced through the silence and woke me up. On the other end, a voice claimed that there had been a noise complaint. Bewildered, I told them I had been soundly asleep and hadn't made any noise at all. The caller was persistent and questioned that perhaps there was someone else in the room with me. I told them there wasn't and fell back asleep without further incident. When I woke again, I felt a nagging sense of unease, reflecting on what had just happened over the phone. Why had the motel staff been so insistent on clarifying my solitary status? The realization dawned on me that the motel hadn't initiated the call at all. It seemed likely that someone had been systematically calling rooms, probing to determine the occupants and their numbers. Grateful for the extra security measure of the latch chain lock, I couldn't shake the feeling of relief that I had avoided whatever sinister intentions lay behind this mysterious caller. I'm a 17-year-old female, and I was out doing some Christmas shopping after school, so it was dark by the time I decided to stop by one of my favorite sushi places, which is near a grocery store and other shops all near my home. The sushi place is right next to a boba shop, and I peek in to try and see if a friend of mine was working so that I could say hello. But I didn't see them, so I turned around and I saw this guy standing there trying to get my attention. "Miss, excuse me." I just stared at him for a second, unsure if I really should be talking to this stranger, before he asks me if I have any spare cash for him to buy a drink. I tell him I don't have any cash on me, and that I'm sorry. He says it's fine, and I walk into the sushi place. While I wait for my food, I wonder if I should have just offered him to buy him a drink, because I'm the kind of person who loves to help people and feel bad ignoring those in need. I get my food. I'm about to exit the store when the guy from earlier walks in. He stops by the door and asking the cashier if he knows how to get help because he thinks his car got stolen and that he was from a neighboring city. I pause because again I felt bad for not helping him earlier and I was curious. I buy him a drink this time, even offered to buy food. I showed him the menu and he glanced at it, then asked for fried rice, which was not on the menu, but I was like, okay, and bought him the drink. He tells me thanks and asks if I know anything about his car, then randomly asks me if I know where Cold Stone is. At this point I'm thinking to myself, if I were either homeless or my car got stolen, Cold Stone is the last place I'd want to be. But I explained to him that it's not within walking distance, and he's like, oh, and asks if I would be able to show him the way and maybe give him a ride there. He pulls out cash from his hoodie pocket saying, I could pay you back $10 for the ride and drink. Now I'm thinking, you had money and let me buy you a drink? And why the hell would I give you a ride? I need to leave. So I respectfully decline and said, hope your situation gets figured out. I leave the sushi place, he exits too, and starts walking beside me. I get scared and decide not to walk back to my car. Instead, I speed walk to a Rite Aid. I turn into an aisle and see that he's still following me. Miss, lady, excuse me. I finally turn around and ask him if there's anything else he needed. Oh, you were gonna give me a ride? No, I can't. Oh, okay, sorry. He walks away. I pace around the back corner of the store for a while, terrified if he's still in the store or waiting for me outside. It just so happened that my phone had died and I had left it in the car. In the store I see a dad with his daughter who looked like a middle schooler, and I go up to them. Finally, I start crying and tell them there was a man talking to me and if they could please walk with me back to my car. The dad asks where I parked, agrees, and a few minutes later we leave Rite Aid. I'm still in tears, poorly explaining the situation. I point out my car as we approach. The dad then says, okay, we'll wait here until you leave. Make sure to check your back seat. I do, and even check the trunk because I'm very paranoid. I thank them before driving off and just sobbed the whole way home because I don't know what exactly was going on with that man and why he wanted to get into my car. I get more scared thinking of the fact that I'm a 5-foot girl who probably couldn't defend herself if it came to it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But what business did a grown man have asking a teenage girl for a ride? I was genuinely terrified. Yes, I shouldn't have been out so late. Yes, I should have had my phone on me. and I probably should have ignored him too. Sorry for being a girl who just wanted sushi at night and to help someone who looked like they needed it. It's hard to trust people clearly. I was returning from a visit with family. I took a Greyhound bus from the airport to Humboldt County. I typically would have flown in to San Francisco, but for some reason I must have flown into Sacramento or LAX, and I don't remember why, being that it was many years ago. I just remember being on that bus for many hours. It was fairly full, and there was a man on the bus who was very friendly, and we chatted most of the way. He was a contractor, and was going to be staying in Chico for several weeks on a job. The further north we got, the emptier the bus became. I remember noticing that the bus driver was driving rather erratically for much of the trip north. He was also taking a lot of back roads, which is weird, as he was driving inordinarily fast. I was noticing that with each stop there were fewer and fewer people on the bus, until the only two people remaining were myself and the contractor that I had been chatting to. I became very uncomfortable, and I knew that once we got past the Chico stop, there weren't going to be many stops, and we were going to be into the Redwoods, and I knew that I was going to be the only person that was probably going to be on that bus, because the contractor was getting off in Chico, and I was fairly certain that at that hour of the night we were traveling there would likely be very few people who wanted to go to Humboldt County. I felt very uneasy about this bus driver, and I remember just putting my head in my hands and praying and asking for God to protect me and give me a sign whether I should get off the bus in Chico where the man was getting off and simply get a hotel there and hop on another bus in the morning first thing. And I was really nervous about telling the man that I felt uncomfortable, as I didn't know him, and I didn't want to be a burden to him. After a little while, the man turned to me and asked if I felt uncomfortable. He told me that he felt really weird about me being on the bus by myself. I knew at that moment this was the Lord's way of keeping me safe. The man offered to pay for my hotel room, and I accepted his offer. He did pay for my room, and was just the nicest man ever. He didn't try to come to my room or anything like that. He even paid for the brunch they had at the hotel in the morning. It was very nice. I just was reminded of that story and wanted to share it, and I'm thankful I didn't take that bus, because I honestly don't know what would have happened to me if I would have. This is a memory I buried so deep I almost convinced myself it never happened. It only surfaced again recently, when my siblings and I were reminiscing about our dad, how absent-minded and scatterbrained he could be. Sometimes in ways that made us laugh until we cried. But when someone brought up how he once left my brother at the gas station for 40 minutes, something cracked open with me. I remember the beach, the boy, the water. I was about 4 years old when this happened. I'd taken a bad fall on the playground and split the back of my head open, which needed stitches, my first real injury. I screamed like a banshee getting them in, but weeks later when it came time to take them out, I sat stoically still for the doctor, determined to be brave. My dad was so proud he rewarded me with ice cream and a spontaneous trip to the beach. It was a small, mostly forgotten town in the Australian coast in the middle of summer. The beach should have been bustling, but it was strangely quiet, just a few kids splashing around in the shallows. Hardly any parents and no lifeguard. My dad walked me to the shoreline and gave me a serious look. No deeper than your knees, not till I get back. He then turned and walked off, probably to use the toilet or take a phone call. He wasn't a bad dad, but just distracted. He loved us, but he didn't always think. I stayed where he told me, kicking at the waves. That's when a boy, of around 11, broke away from the group of kids further down and began drifting closer. He had blonde hair that stuck to his forehead in wet strands, and a weird grin. As he came closer, he said hi and asked my name and how old I was. I remember feeling flattered. A big kid talking to me? I wanted him to think I was cool, so I told him everything, how brave I'd been at the doctor's, how I got a sticker, and how I barely cried. He laughed. That's when he asked me why I wasn't swimming properly. I explained my dad said no deeper than my knees until he got back, as, truthfully, I wasn't a strong swimmer yet. He leaned forward. "It's okay, I'll teach you. It doesn't count if someone's helping." I hesitated. "What's wrong, you scared? I thought you were brave." I don't remember deciding to follow him. One minute I was standing where the water lapped at my knees, and the next I was further out, feet losing contact with the sandy bottom. The other kids had turned away. And then he grabbed me. There was no warning, no playfulness. He dunked me fast and hard beneath the surface and held me there. I thrashed and kicked. My arms flailed. I was so small and his grip was so strong. He just kept me under. Salt water filled my nose and mouth. I couldn't scream and I couldn't breathe. My chest burned. I remember the sun flashing through the surface above me like shattered glass. I fought for as long as I could until he let go. Suddenly I was being hauled up out the water, coughing, choking and screaming. My dad's arms clutched me against his chest, water pouring off both of us. His face was twisted in this terrible mix of confusion, fury and terror. He held me like he didn't know how to let go, patting my back while I coughed up more and more water and wailed onto his shoulder. By the time I could speak, the boy had gone. The beach was nearly empty. The other kids had scattered. My dad wrapped me around in his shirt and sat with me until I stopped shaking. Then once I was calm enough to sit upright, he started driving around. For hours, we searched. I don't think he would have hesitated to take that boy's life had we found him. I never told my mum. I don't think he did either. It became one of those traumas that everyone agrees never to bring up. But it's never really gone. I still think about it sometimes, what might have happened if Dad hadn't have come back when he did, and if the boy didn't let go, and if the beach had been just a bit more empty. Because I now know exactly what he was doing. He lured me out deliberately, away from the shallows and away from witnesses. A 4-year-old alone with no adults around would have looked like a tragic drowning. Drowning a child is the perfect crime. And that sick, twisted, and demented boy knew it. I work in the restaurant business, and we had a regular customer who just stared at everyone. He would try to hide it if you caught him looking. He would come into the store, sit in the corner, and just stare at the workers. We all deduced he was homeless because of his attire. Since it was getting super cold out, we let him stay if he didn't bother anyone. There were times he would go into the restroom, creak the door open and just stare. One day he stopped showing up to our store. We were all unsettled by him, so we didn't think too much of it. Well, after a while, our boss comes across a local news article, and it showed a mugshot of a man who attempted to stab his mother to death. It was the same guy who came to our store staring at people. Last I heard, he had a $200,000 bond, and someone bailed him out. His mother was okay, but evidently she was stabbed something like 12 times. I worked in a haunted pub. There was a manager who got shot in a bar fight in the 20s, who you could see wandering up and down the bar every now and then. He was chill. The pub manager lived above the pub, and there was apparently a room you just did not go into. There was an old lady in there and she was evil, and apparently no one could stand being in there for more than a few minutes from just the atmosphere. We also used to get a lot of concerned women coming to the bar asking about the little girl in the bathroom on her own and to check on her. She would always stand right by the bathroom entrance. She liked to knock on the bathroom stall doors. She was pretty chill, just mischievous. For reference, I'm a 26-year-old female, and this happened before Christmas 2019, and it stuck with me to this day. My then boyfriend, now husband, and I decided to meet for dinner at a Christmas market in Switzerland. He would pick up our dog from doggy daycare and I would get there after work. Some things are good to know. At that point, we'd had our dog for about a year called Bean. He's a medium-sized dog, and before he came to Switzerland, he was a street dog in Italy. He was about 2.5, and loved and still loves to get all the attention he can. Christmas markets are generally very busy here, especially after work. People will meet there with friends to eat dinner and drink mulled wine. When we got to the Christmas market, we realized that it was way too busy to walk through with a dog. So I sent my boyfriend to go get my favorite street food, malawak, and waited at the edge of the market with Bean. Bean likes to greet everyone who looks at him, and by that point I had gotten used to talking with strangers because my dog wanted to meet them, so I wasn't too concerned at first when a dude came up to me. Full transparency, I don't remember all of this word for word, but I do remember Bean happily greeted this guy trying to stand up against him and lick his hands. The guy asked for his name, what breed he was, and I told him he was a Pinscher mix, and that's when the situation started. The man insisted he must be a Basenji. How could I say he's a Pinscher? All of a sudden he switched. There's no better way to explain it. He grabbed Bean's lead and said, "I'll go now," and just tried to walk off with my dog. Thankfully, I had a firm grip on it. I was incredibly confused and flustered, and just stammered that he couldn't take my dog. He got increasingly more angry with every second that I didn't let go of the leash, and I loudly told him to leave me alone, and Bean began to bark at the man. I've never seen Bean this angry and scared at the same time, and thankfully the man let go of the leash and slipped into the crowd. I was standing there dumbfounded. Bean was barking and shaking, so I knelt down to calm him, holding him and talking to him. My boyfriend was still somewhere in the crowd waiting for our food. After a while, a woman walked up to me and told me not to put my heel on the floor, as she'd just seen someone put a firecracker there. I don't know the name for this kind of firecracker, as they're quite small, and are usually put on the floor to make a small boom sound on impact. Someone had put them under the heel of my shoe so it would explode when I put my foot down. Now I don't know what's worse. Was it the same guy that tried to steal my dog? Or is it someone else who thought, "Oh, a distressed dog, let's scare it a bit more"? I think the worst thing for me was that apart from that woman who warned me, no one else helped me when I was harassed by a strange guy, even though I loudly asked him to go away, and there were people standing very close and watching the whole ordeal. Thankfully, the events of that evening had no lasting impact on Bean. He still loves to greet strangers, and I still remember and don't think I will ever forget. I usually sit in the front of the bus, perhaps because I'm close to the entrance, or perhaps because I feel more secure near the driver. I just hang down my head listening to my headphones, but only ever with one, because I like to hear what's happening around me. This was the first time I saw him. I heard when he started to speak with me, so I put down my headphones and the bus was quite empty. It was just me and one other person who was far in the back. The driver was between 30 and 40. He looked just like a bus driver at that age, a little overweight with blonde hair and a couple of days without shaving. "You gonna work?" "Yeah." This bus was a common line to get to the one large workplace around my area. He asked a few questions, just some small talk, and I didn't mind. Then he started telling me about his ex and her kids. "She called the police on me. I just need to put my lotion on my crotch. The kid was in the bathroom with me, but I need to do it because the doctor told me I need to do it every day." I froze. I didn't see that coming. Then I heard his story about how he was not a child toucher. He just needed to put his ointment on his parts, and it just so happened to be at the same time his girlfriend's kids were around him. And all the details that she was crazy. I honestly didn't know how to respond. I think I told him something about, "Yeah, but if you're innocent, they'll see that." It was the longest bus ride and most uncomfortable one I've ever been on. I just wanted it to end. I thought of calling the bus company, but on the other hand, he was already under investigation by the police, so I never called them. I'll never forget the last line in our conversation. "Do you have kids?" I told him I did not. My dad and stepmom were screaming at each other so loud could have shaken the walls. Their arguments were exhausting and way too frequent. So that weekend, my dad packed my older sister and me into his truck and drove us a few hours south to my uncle's house. On our last day there, my dad took us to a decommissioned Navy battleship, now a rusting tourist attraction. I'd never been on a ship before, and I remember being fascinated. The steel corridors, the claustrophobic sleeping quarters, the greasy smell of old machinery. It felt like a haunted house built for war. Somewhere along the way, this man appeared. He was just there suddenly, standing near the entrance to one of the long corridors. Older, scruffy and unshaven, wearing saggy khaki shorts and a stained white shirt. He started talking to my dad. My dad, always polite, always sociable, humored him. He didn't seem threatening at first. The man kept popping up though. Every deck we explored, every twist in the hallway, every exhibit, we turned the corner and he'd be nearby watching us. We made it to the top deck, the control tower, where the breeze finally cut through the humidity, and my dad and sister were admiring the view, leaning against the railing outside. I wandered into the control room alone, drawn to the massive glass window and dusty levers. As I stood there for a moment, imagining what it would be like to command a ship like this. I was looking out at the sea when I felt it, the air behind me change, and I turned and there he was, the man standing in the middle of the room, not more than 5 feet away. His shorts were pulled down in the front, his genitals exposed. His face was calm as he watched me. I froze. The fear hit so hard, like a brick to the face. My legs eventually remembered how to move and I ran, sprinting out of the door and across the deck to my dad, but the man didn't follow. He drifted behind us like a shadow, and as we left the tower and descended the metal staircase towards the submarines, he stayed close enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't find a moment to tell my dad not what he was watching. It wasn't until we passed the gift shop nearing the exit gates that 2 security guards stopped him. They didn't wrestle him or shout. They just calmly stepped into his path like they'd done it before. I finally told my dad what happened and what I saw, and his face changed, his jaw clenched like stone, and for a second I thought he was going to turn back and kill the man. Instead, he stormed over to the nearest staff member, a young woman in a polo shirt, and told her what happened. Her response? A sigh. "We've had other complaints. Same guy. Cops are on their way." It was just another day for her. Like a predator stalking was the most normal thing in the world. We never set foot on that ship again. We still drive past it sometimes on the way to my uncle's. It looms in the harbor, frozen in time. And every time I see it, I wonder how long the man had been following me for before I noticed. I'll start off by saying that high school was the beginning of years of horrible bullying and mental and emotional abuse, especially from the people who were supposedly my friends. I was short, chubby, homely, and apparently very socially awkward. I had high hopes that going off to university and leaving these people behind would be the end of it, but I could not have been more wrong. My tormentors from high school were mean, but the people I lived with on my residence floor were downright hostile and cruel. Everything I was bullied about in high school were things they hated me even worse for. Needless to say, I was beaten down to a pulp, spineless, self-hating, and traumatized. The summer between my first and second year at school ended up being life-changing. I dropped a bunch of weight, grew into my looks a bit more, and learned how to do makeup, dress nicely, and greatly improved my social skills. I went back that next year an entirely different person. Suddenly I wasn't picked on anymore, and for the first time in my life boys were noticing me, and I was actually getting pretty popular. Over the next 2 years, I continued on this upward trend, and by the summer before my final year, I was the happiest and most confident I had ever been. However, That did not erase the years of trauma and abuse that had so badly damaged my psyche. Despite finally being in a good place, inside I was still a beaten down, spineless little girl who never stood up for herself and let people push her into doing things she didn't want to do because she felt like she had to. And this is where my story begins. One night my friend Jaina invited me out to a bar with her friend Glenn one Saturday night. Why not? I hopped on a bus and told her I was on my way. When I got to the bar, Jaina waved me over to her table where she was sitting with this massive, hulking guy. Not like a bodybuilder, but more reminiscent of Hodor from Game of Thrones. "Alice, this is Glenn?" We exchanged our pleasantries and proceeded with no longer being sober. As the night wore on, it was pretty obvious that Glenn was interested in me. He kept smiling at me flirtatiously and giving me the look up and down, and he really liked that I was into things like video games, movies, and comic books. I guess he wasn't doing anything overtly aggressive or creepy, but something about him just gave me bad vibes that said, I don't know about this guy. But I kept telling myself it was all in my imagination. A few days later, the three of us made plans to see the new Spider-Man movie that had just come out. As I was getting ready, I got a call from Glenn, informing me that Jaina had given him my address, and that he was going to be coming over to walk me to our university campus where Jaina still lived. I got the bad vibes again, thinking I didn't want him walking with me. So I said, "Oh no, don't do that. It'll be much easier to go separately, than just meet me at Jaina's." His response was a very aggressive no, and that he was going to walk me. Okay, that was a tad alarming, but I knew he wouldn't relent, and that we would be walking the 30 minutes to campus together whether I liked it or not. When the movie ended, Glenn invited us to hang out and drink at his place, where we would stay the night. He lived a good ways away from where Jaina and I did, so staying the night did make sense, but I felt uneasy and thought to myself, I'll be fine, I'll be with Jaina. It wasn't fine. For some insane reason, he felt a good way to impress me was showing me how much he could drink, because that's what everyone's looking for in a partner, which was much less than he thought, and soon he was horrendously drunk. And that, my friends, is when it all hits the fan. He turned into a complete ogre, began punching out lights and tearing his clothes to shreds in a drunken rage before running into the bathroom and loudly expelling everything. When he came back, Jaina got up to use the bathroom next, and I begged her not to go, or at the very least to let me come in with her so that I wouldn't be alone, but she said no and left me to fend for myself. That's when Glenn grabbed me and started making out with me, shoving his tongue down my throat. Did I mention he had literally just puked his guts out and even had some on what little was left of his shirt? I started pushing him away, which was difficult as he was much taller, heavier, and stronger than I was. This, of course, angered him, and he started breaking things again. That's when I got a text from Jaina. "We should go. He's absolutely pathetic like this." And I immediately called for a cab. We informed Glenn that we were leaving, incensing him even further. "Yeah, well, I'm not gonna let you leave." That's when we ran out the door to the street. Fortunately, he didn't chase after us, and our cab got there quickly. We were dropped off at Jaina's residence building where we lamented the night, and I pulled the sliver of broken light bulb from my foot. Now, a word about Jaina. Like me, she too had suffered years of abuse and trauma that manifested itself in a horrific taste in men to whom she'd be completely subservient. That I knew, but what she told me next shocked me even more. Her and Ben were actually casually hooking up, and had been for a while. He took her home that night after the bar, and as he was literally climbing into bed with her, he told her how much he wanted to bang me, and he wanted her help to make it happen. Remember what I said about the fact that I'm into video games, movies, and comics? That also meant that I pinged on his gaydar, and he said to her, "If she doesn't do it with me, it means she's a lesbian." Now that was some next level stuff right there. The next day, Glenn texts me. "Little birdie told me you're not very happy with me." That bird is very right. "Yeah, sorry I acted that way. So you'd be interested in playing some mini-golf sometime?" I could not believe the nerve of him. A half-assed apology over such horrible behavior that he was barely acknowledging, and then asking to hang out again? I knew that was insanity. But beaten down, spineless little me still thought maybe I should give him a partial second chance. Maybe, but if you think I'll ever have any funny business with you, you're out of your mind. What? Course not. In fact, I'm offended you'd even think those were my intentions. Yeah, no, I'm out. Unfortunately, he also knew the store that I worked at and came to my checkout aisle a few times, once to buy a replacement for the t-shirt he ripped apart, and would try to strike up casual conversation before suggesting we go somewhere together. I'd treat him as coldly as possible and give him a very definite decline. He seemed to have finally given up, as he stopped coming by, much to my relief. But that was not quite the end. A few weeks went by when I received a furious text from Glenn. "Oh, so what, you ain't even gonna talk to me anymore?" I couldn't believe it. After everything he'd done and said, he thinks I'm the arse in all of this? How could someone be so self-centered and deluded? I told him of course I wasn't talking to him anymore, that he's beyond abusive, unhinged, and thinks he can have whatever he wants. And I made it very clear that I didn't want to see him again and just leave me alone. He never messaged back. But rather than make me feel better, I was growing increasingly paranoid. Did that mean he had truly given up? Or was he planning another attack? Luckily, my roommate and our best friend were big, burly guys and made sure to escort me around because he knew where I lived and where I worked. And I'm happy to say that the text message really was the last I heard of him. "Glenn, I don't wish you ill. In fact, I hope you get the help you much desperately need. But please, let's not meet again." In the early 2000s, I worked in a grand hotel and casino, housed within a beautiful building constructed in the mid-1880s. Given its age and history, it wasn't uncommon for rumors of hauntings to circulate. There were always a few hallways and rooms on the second floor where eerie incidents occurred, with sightings of a mysterious object, sometimes grey or black in colour. One afternoon shift, a colleague of mine called Michael had to be sedated by a paramedic due to extreme panic. I only heard about this story secondhand, as I was working somewhere else at the time, but what I knew was that Michael had to be urgently taken to the hospital. According to Michael, he was cleaning the kitchen's hot section in preparation for the evening service when he encountered something unsettling. Alone and in the kitchen, he saw a dark shape without clear edges drift across the room and vanish into the adjoining area where mysterious objects had been spotted before. The figure made no sound, and Michael only noticed it because he caught it in his peripheral vision. He was a devout Catholic, and after that experience refused to work alone in that kitchen. Several months later, during a standard graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I found myself tasked with entering the very room where sightings had occurred. It was around 3:40 a.m., and I braced myself for an eerie encounter. As I unlocked the door and stepped into the room, I was greeted by a mundane scene. A large bar fridge with a red Coke logo in the corner, surrounded by stacks of glasses and various other items. There was even a broken poker machine tucked away in another corner. The anticlimactic nature of this room struck me, and I couldn't help but chuckle to myself, thinking, of all of the rooms, this is the one you chose to haunt? In the end, Michael pursued a career as a bus driver, perhaps to get out of the hotel once and for all. I was leaving my uncle's house and standing in his garden after loading my dog and things in the car, when I saw a light from the corner of my eye, seemingly travelling along a path along his house. Strangely, I wasn't really paying attention to it, and I thought it might have been his neighbour driving an RC car, as it was Christmas time and there were lots of lights around. Then my cousin, who was maybe around 12, said something to the effect of, "Look, there's a drone." At that point it seemed to loop around his tree and vanish. I told her to show me where the drone was, and she ran inside to get shoes. At this point I thought someone was messing around with the drone and it had crashed, but I noticed there was no sound, and I became slightly alarmed and told my cousin to come out and show me where the drone was. My uncle then picked up on the fact that something strange was happening, but he had bad eyesight and never saw a thing. He probably noticed because I'd never spoken commandingly to my cousins before. She came running out and approached the tree, and I felt like that's where she noticed something was strange, because she put her hands out as if she was going to take an object from it, then just froze for a second and said something like, "It was just here." The camera outside my uncle's house picked up what looked like a tiny jet of flames, but I've reviewed the footage, and even though the quality isn't great, it doesn't really look like what I've seen, but it did pick up the anomaly. I suppose I should describe better what I saw. It appeared to be a small, ball-shaped, transparent, or very shiny, semi-transparent object with another darker shape inside and some kind of light. It sort of looked like a Formula 1 car with an open-wheel race car inside. I feel I didn't get a good look at it though, and when I asked my cousin to describe it, she described what I feel was only half the objects as seen from the side, like a C shape, when it was closer to an X. In her description, it had something on the tips of the C shape. I asked if she'd seen propellers like a quadcopter drone, and she said she hadn't. I also didn't get a bad vibe or anything. It felt like I'd seen something natural but unusual. I feel like it was sentient and aware of our presence and left when we noticed it. But I felt like it didn't have bad intentions. I can't really explain it. I've always been a complete skeptic. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. But this event plays on my mind often. I've seen people talk about the after effects of seeing UAP as they've had some symptoms of fever and feeling strange. I remember my uncle saying it seemed kind of scattered. I remember feeling a bit light, buzzy, like when I'm dehydrated. I had a million thoughts running through my mind and was a little hot and cold or clammy. My mind racing, and one thing I remember thinking about was a historical account of the Will-o'-the-Wisps and whether or not I saw what those people had seen. I often feel nauseous and have health issues, so I didn't really pay any attention at the time and was just very shaken and shocked. When I read something about people feeling strange after seeing UAPs or UFOs, I had to close the post to try not to think too much about it. When I reflected on it, I noticed his neighbor had one of those projector lights that shine Christmas images on your house, and was about to be relieved until I realized it wasn't what I had experienced in the slightest. If anyone has any idea how to debunk this, I'd love to hear about it. Sometimes in the late 2000s, my family was coming back from visiting some extended family. This was in a somewhat rural, industrial Midwest state. My dad was driving with my grandma, mum, brother and me in the car. I was in my late teens at the time. It was dusk and would soon be getting dark. We were on a back road because my grandma was navigating and didn't know what a highway was. There were some industrial buildings and stuff around, but it was all shut down or abandoned. So we're cruising along, and my grandma spots a person in one of those big electric wheelchairs that lays back. They're just sitting in an empty lot by the road. It was so out of place, and there was no one around, and it was starting to get dark. My grandma was a saint and really wanted to stop and see if they needed help, but I had a horrible feeling and felt sick thinking about it. I voiced my concerns about how something seems very wrong, and luckily my dad agreed and we didn't stop. It was a fraction of a second encounter. We didn't even slow down, but we tried to figure out what to do for a few minutes after we passed. I just had a nauseous feeling that something bad was going to happen. I don't know if it was a trap or someone who needed help that was just hanging up for some reason.
A number of years ago, I participated in a cultural exchange, a school-sanctioned adventure across Europe, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. And the travel agency offered us an extension, Tallinn, Estonia, and then across the Baltic Sea to Helsinki, Finland. How could we say no? We were teenagers loose in the world for the first time, and the idea of crossing a sea on a real ship felt unreal. The morning we boarded the ferry was cold and grey, typical European weather. The ship itself was massive. The morning we boarded the ferry was cold and grey. A group of girls had taken over a table in the dining area, just laughing, eating, and scrolling through their cameras. That's when he came. A middle-aged, gaunt-looking guy, grey at the temples, wearing a pale windbreaker zipped all the way up to his throat, despite the heat in the dining area. He approached their table and started speaking in rapid Russian, gesturing with his hands. The girls blinked, caught off guard, and said they didn't understand, only English. He smiled, nodded, and walked away. But he didn't go far. Minutes later he was back, not speaking this time, just sitting at the next table. His eyes didn't move. He stared unapologetically and unblinkingly, absorbing every detail like he was trying to memorize them. The girls felt uncomfortable, so they moved. Across the room, behind some fake plants. And he moved again, appearing at the next table. They tried to ignore him until Becca noticed the lens of the camera peeking out from under his coat. That was when they ran. They found a group of teachers and parents clustered around the coffee bar. Words tumbled out, but the adults understood enough. Our trip leader went off in search for a crew member, and the rest followed the girls back to their table, but the man had already gone. The girls laughed nervously. They stuck close to the adults, until Mary stood up, who needed to use the bathroom. She said she'd be quick, and another girl had just gone in, so it felt safe enough to do so. The corridor to the restroom was narrow and dimly lit, swaying slightly with the motion of the ship. She hurried along the hallway and then stopped. He was there again, standing halfway down the hall as if he'd been waiting. Mary didn't say a word. She rushed past him, trying to stay calm, heart thudding, lungs tight. She ducked into the bathroom and locked the door. Her breathing hitched, then turned to gasping. She was hyperventilating, crouched in a cold stall, unsure if he was right outside. What she didn't know is that one of the dads had quietly followed her, a gut feeling he'd seen the man too. When he saw the man shadowing Mary, he didn't hesitate. He walked right past him, locked eyes, staring. The man looked startled for the first time. His eyes flickered down. He turned and walked quickly away, swallowed by the hallway. Mr. Jensen stood outside the bathroom like a statue, and when he was sure the man was gone, he knocked gently and told Mary it was safe. By then Mr. Powell had returned with a ferry employee who spoke English. He listened to the story, nodding with a grim expression, and they agreed to talk to the man, but we never saw him again. It's crazy to think how creeps like this try and prey on young innocent girls in a vulnerable place like the middle of the ocean. This all began when I was trying to sell a watch on Facebook Marketplace. I get a message from the guy in question, and he's extremely pushy, and that he wants the item quickly. They agree to come over to my house to pay for the item. I tell them that I don't have any change and to bring the exact amount. He tells me that he needs me to have change and that he will be unable to fulfill my request. He says this several times, which I find increasingly odd. I mean, if you want the watch, just get the change, bro, am I right? Anyway, the day comes and he arrives to my house. He parks round the corner so I can't see the vehicle, and when I open the door,
He fumbles with his money and says he doesn't have the right change. What a surprise. I tell him that he needs to go get it, and then he says to come to his car and that he has the change there. Instead of going to get the change himself, he beckons me to go with him to the car, while I still have the watch in my hand, which I really didn't want to do. He then pleads that I do so, and so begrudgingly, I step past the boundary of my home and over the side of the house to where his car is parked. When I turn the corner, I see there are several people waiting in the car. At this moment, I start to get a very bad feeling. It feels like he's luring me away from my home, and with these guys who look like they're about to leave the car, I realize I could be in danger. So I take the money, throw him the watch, and run back to my house and leave it at that. I don't know if I was overreacting in this situation, but the fear, anxiety, and general situation really gave me some red flags that I wish I'd have seen sooner. In any case, be careful when selling stuff online and giving people your home. You never know who you're letting know where you live. I was staying in a chalet in the state of Maine, Vermont, with 3 others. The lady at the front desk was approximately 1 billion years old, with cloudy eyes, and her front desk was a small table next to a recliner in a room full of knickknacks and china dolls. The actual room was what I imagine a hotel room in the 40s would look like, and obviously had never been remodeled. The bathroom had a metal claw foot tub, and the worst part though was the door at the back of the room. I assumed it would be another closet, but we opened it and there was nothing but cold and darkness. We used the flashlight on our phones and discovered a long, wide, cement-walled hallway. I assumed it was used to travel between rooms when the weather was bad, but the vibe it gave off was making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The night went smoothly and nothing ever happened, but I still feel like we survived a night in a boring horror movie. I tried to look for it again, but with no results. I have to ask my grandma who booked the trip. She managed to find a review on Orbitz. Room was okay, bathroom was clean and modern, but a few things had bothered us. One were the flies in the room. Not many, but we did have to squat several before we could go to sleep. Each room has a back door to an unlit hallway, and when we arrived to the room, that door was unlocked and wide open. We closed and locked it, of course, and in our second room, the back door was closed but unlocked, so we locked it. When we came back later that evening, the door was unlocked again. Needless to say, we were spooked. We hadn't left anything in the room during the evening, so nothing was taken or disturbed, but I would still not go back.